Hey guys! This is part 4 of What If Naruto Became a Spy. Hit like and subscribe if you like this one, and also please check the author in the description. Let's start. Chapter 8, 3 Days at the Festival, and That's Outrageous. Kakuzu said. The clerk at the desk didn't react, but Kakuzu noticed that the man's pupils were dilated slightly. So, he was good enough to keep his face under control, but he was still reacting to Kakuzu's killing intent. Why do you always have to be such a chiapass? Hidan said, lounging against the desk. He was getting bored of listening to his partner complain about how high the prices were. The clerk swallowed. It's really busy for the festival. If you want a room and you don't have reservations, then it's going to be at least this expensive anywhere you go, Kakuzu growled. What he really wanted to do was lunge out and kill the man with one punch, but that would blow their cover. Just shell over the cash already. Hidan whined. I'm sick of this shit, Kakuzu grunted. 60, that's final. The clerk frowned. It was reasonable, but he didn't want to let two guys like this stay in his inn. Still, they hadn't done anything obviously illegal, and discrimination was against the law in the Snow Country. So he was obligated to let them stay. 65, he said. Driving them off by not backing down on price was the best option. Kakuzu frowned, the space between his eyebrows scrunching fiercely. Fine. Whatever, we'll pay it. Hidan said. Sheesh. Kakuzu turned to look at his partner. Shut it, you. The clerk cleared his throat. Well, I could give you a room for 60, but it's a single. If you don't mind sharing then. Oh hell no. Hidan said. We'll pay the damn 65 and we'll take the double. God damn it, Kakuzu, why are you always such a tightwad? Kakuzu scowled, and began carefully counting out bills to the clerk. He didn't want to share with Hidan any more than he had to. Damn it, it was getting late. It was almost dark already. They needed a place for the night, and roughing it would be too conspicuous, and Kakuzu didn't think he could stand a whole night of Hidan's griping. Just to spite the clerk, he paid with as many small bills and change as he could dig out of his pockets. The Pine Glades spring was a tier of 3 pools fed by a single hot spring. Pine trees grew right up to the very edge of each pool. Because they were old and thickly grown, they were impossible to move through with normal leaf village tree jumping, and too dense to allow for fast movement between them. In short, it was difficult to approach or leave quickly without making a lot of noise, and it was impossible to know what was going on without being right on top of the spring because it was so secluded. It was the ideal place to have a sensitive meeting between powerful ninjas, Motoko decided, which was why she was sitting on a tree overlooking and frowning down at it in the moonlight. With all the shadows, she had a difficult time discerning what was where. The problem was the two groups could meet in any of the 3 pools, and Motoko would have no way of knowing which before they showed up and chose, so all 3 had to be watched. Some variation of the toad henge would be best, but only Gamakichi and Gamatatsu were trustworthy. That wasn't enough, even if they were willing to do it. Motoko knew a Kage bunshin would be able to last long enough, but not if it was using too much of a disguise jutsu. A Kage bunshin underhenge to look like anything other than a person wouldn't last nearly as long as it needed to. The first order of business was leveraging one pool as being the one they would definitely be using. Motoko had a pretty good idea of how to do that. She would just leave a group of Kage bunshin henge to look like a group in one of the end pools. It would be best to make it 2 or 3 guys, probably napping, drunk, or some combination thereof. They had to obviously be in no condition to spy on the group, so unconscious would probably be best. If they were at one end, the group would naturally meet at the other end. And if they were naked guys, then the kunoichi would be reluctant to approach them, no matter how ninja badass they were. Okay, she would drive them to stay in the upper pool with a trio of guys sleeping off hangovers in the lowest pool. Motoko sighed. Now that she could definitely control where they would meet, how to listen in. Kisame and Itachi are both early risers. It is just one of the many things they have in common. Part of why they have the least friction of any team in Akatsuki is because they simply do things the same way. They both go to bed early, just a few hours after sunset, and they both wake up at or before sunrise. It might seem odd that ninjas would be so rigorous about going to bed early, but that's just the way they are. Neither is terribly introspective. At any rate, that explains why the two of them have already eaten breakfast. It is, after all, the most important meal of the day, and are now beginning to scout around for the loud brat. Kisame sinks down lower into the water, trying to make himself less conspicuous. He is not succeeding. He self-consciously adjusts the washcloth that is sitting on his head. Itachi, he whispered, everyone is staring. That, Itachi says, is irrelevant. He glances around, the Sharingan instantly categorizing everyone around them. Mostly they are old people, the only sort that are up as early as the two missing Nin and not out working somewhere. Itachi is dead on the inside. It doesn't bother him that he's permanently burning the image of naked old people into his memory. There is a gaggle of housewives congregated around a rock. They titter when Itachi's eye sweeps over them, but they have very weak chakra. To the Uchiha, they're about as interesting as the rock. Kisame has better hearing than Itachi. He can hear what those housewives are whispering to each other. That dark-haired one is so cute. I would take the blue one home, too. Don't bother, they're clearly together. Kisame fidgets, and tries to lower himself a little further into the water. He misses Samahadama already, but he promised Itachi he'd leave his weapon behind. It's just too obvious. It's not fair that Itachi gets to use his Sharingan. This is a waste of time. Itachi says to Kisame. Let's go. Itachi stands. His towel snags on a rock and is pulled off. Everyone freezes. The spring goes dead silent. Itachi looks down. Calmly, he plucks the towel of the surface of the water and wraps it back around his waist, and begins to walk to the exit. It is like nothing has happened. Kisame, miserable, follows as discreetly as he can. He is hating every minute of this. I would be hunched over too if I had to take that in the... Kisame stumbles. He would really like to have Samahadama with him. His pants too. Ursura cracked her knuckles. She was pumped, excited. Someone with less self-assurance would be nervous about something going wrong. But Ursura didn't attain the pinnacle of the stone village with weakness or doubt. Although, admittedly, going in literally naked was a little much. Okyute was out keeping watch over Sharingan Kakashi. He would know, but that was good too. He would be worried about being under surveillance, so he'd be less concerned with reconnaissance. Rather, even if he knew they were covering something up, it wasn't like he could spare the manpower to figure out what. Tetsuko had set up a guard point at the west end of the pool. The stone delegation coming from the west and the cloud from the east had been a convenient bit of symbolism. Regardless of that, Tetsuko was probably still super angry that she had insisted on going in alone. Chigaku was underground somewhere. Ursura smirked and lowered herself into the top pool at precisely 9:55 a.m. It was time. Hi, Irika, Shizune said, smiling. She looked up from the mission she was organizing, reading through requests that had been forwarded from the customer office for assignment to teams. Tsunade grumbled, sorting through more sensitive documents. Technically she should be reading them while secreted away, but if Shizune wasn't supervising they wouldn't be read. Good morning, Irika said. He paused, debating whether to mention what a nice surprise it was to see Tsunade this morning. He decided it wasn't worth his neck. Something wrong? The Hokage growled. Oh no, Irika said. I just suddenly wondered how Naruto was doing. It's better to dodge an attack than block it. Basic taijutsu, he taught it every day, the Hokage sighed. That boy, she said, and it was both warm and exasperated, has probably forgotten all about his job and made friends with the enemy. Shizune giggled. That would be just like him, wouldn't it? She grinned. Since they're all kunoichi, I wouldn't be surprised if one fell in love with him. Irika sighed. I don't even know what to say. He stepped forward and began picking through the folders, finally stopping at the one he needed, skimming as he nodded. He needed some numbers on mission availability for when he inevitably got asked by Nin that just happened to be passing by about what the good missions were. Preparation was half the battle. Another taijutsu lesson he pounded into kids' heads. Are you doing anything for lunch? Shizune said, a study in casual. HM? Irika said, looking up. Ah, yes, actually. I guess I'm going on a date with Anko. You guess? Tsunade said, looking up. If Irika hurt Shizune, Tsunade would break his knees. Irika nodded uncomfortably, sensing the danger. Yeah. We've been meeting for lunch the last few days. Irika's innate kindness was endangering him. He wasn't quite willing to paint Anko as a kidnapper. It's casual, but well, they're dates, I suppose. Shizune nodded. I see. Well, if that's everything, I'll see you later. Tsunade said. Irika, sensing the dismissal for what it was, fled. The master and disciple read through the scrolls a little more. You okay? Tsunade finally asked. With Anko getting him, I mean? Shizune nodded. Well, it's not like I have a right to be angry. She paused, setting the scroll aside for a moment. Even then, Anko was the first to go after him. It's not always the first person that wins. Tsunade offered, thinking of Dan. That's true. Shizune nodded. But... She paused. I think Anko was more serious about it than we were. Karina, I was just getting sick of Asuma not making a move, I think. And you? Tsunade said, once it became apparent Shizune wouldn't add more. I guess I was just interested in a guy that would attract even Anko's attention. He really is a great guy. Shizune said, are you okay with that? Tsunade said. Shizune shrugged, and picked up the scroll again. Well, Anko deserves the chance, I guess. Tsunade said. The two got back to work. Finally Tsuanda broke the silence again. There's always Genma. Shizune's answering snort would have been very hurtful to him had Genma been there to hear it. Reiko closed her eyes, concentrating as she channeled chakra through her arms and into her bracers. Karima watched silently as she used this new flux technique, while Yujito stood at her flank, trying not to fidget. Whatever Reiko was doing was making the Nikomata restless and irritable. Kamami was up on one of her smaller cranes keeping watch from the air. 3 men involved with the noodle business, from what she could overhear, had been drinking in the Pine Glade Springs since she began surveying at 8, and had drunk themselves into a stupor by 9:30. No one else had entered or exited the area since she had started her flyovers. Reiko opened her eyes and grinned. There's the 3 in the low spring pool to the south, 1 at the west end of the zone, 1 just entered the north pool. Also, there's another moving underground. I suspect that one's Chigaku. Karima raised an eyebrow. Reiko smiled. My newest technique is for information gathering, not annihilation? Karima asked dryly. I'm disappointed too, Reiko said without missing a beat. Anyway, all living things generate an electromagnetic field. There are a couple kinds of animals, sharks mostly, that can actually detect them. Reiko held up her gauntlets. With these, charged full of my electric-type chakra, I can detect reactions from people's fields. She smiled. I have yet to meet a shinobi that has even thought of hiding their electromagnetic presence, let alone actually accomplish it. Reiko paused. Also, I can always tell which way is north, a basically unblockable range-finding jutsu. That's very good, Karima said. Reiko grunted. Right now, it's high A-grade difficulty. Getting the response is easy, but understanding it is really hard. The data is very delicate, so it requires a deep understanding of what you're doing. I think it's beyond anyone, not me. Karima closed her eyes. It would be nice to give to our hunters, but on the other hand, at least it's nearly impossible for someone else to use against us, too. Yujito cleared her throat. Time, Karima mused. Very well. She faced Yujito. Stay at the east point with Reiko. I don't want them to see you off by yourself. Yes. Karima-sama. Yujito murmured, her face a mask as the leader of the group went up to the meeting. Reiko sat down and pulled out her book. She stared at the cover for a minute before sighing. She set the book down for now. Yujito looked up. Hey, Reiko said. What was that stuff the other night about? Yujito crossed her arms and raised an eyebrow. Reiko grimaced. Seeing Karima's signature brow arching on someone else was still unnerving. Yujito probably didn't even know where she'd copied that from, to boot. You know what I'm talking about, Reiko said. That how do you know if you like someone business? You never struck me to get sidetracked by a guy, so what the hell was he doing that? She. Yujito snipped. Her name was Motoko, and she was nice to me. Reiko paused, and then cleared her throat uncomfortably. Ah. Okay. Well, carpet and hardwood are both floors, so it's okay, I guess, but still, what the hell? Yujito blinked. I have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. Ah geez. Reiko said. Alright, so if you like a guy, then that's hardwood, but if you like girls, well, then it's more like carpet, 'cause, well, you know. Yujito sat still for a moment, and then color bloomed across her cheeks. That's not it at all. She stopped, and visibly took control of herself. Motoko was nice to me and called me a friend. Yujito paused, before continuing, quieter. So, what's friendship? Reiko sighed. You know, Karima doesn't even think you feel emotions like that. Reiko paused. To be honest, she's too optimistic like that. Yujito didn't move. Reiko grunted, gathering her thoughts. You exist only to be the handle for the sword called Nikomata. History shows that extraneous things like feelings are weaknesses for Jinchuriki like you. It would be best if you erased this feeling, okay? Reiko grimaced. It's tough for a shinobi, too, but killing the heart is absolutely vital for a Jinchuriki. So put aside those kinds of emotions. Yes, Reiko-san. Yujito said heavily. It's easy once you're used to it. Reiko advised. Her voice was inflected with an odd heaviness, the result of a lifetime as an excellent shinobi, who had already fully mastered setting aside the self's desires for the sake of the mission. Yujuto couldn't tell. Her own heart was already filled with its own heaviness, the result of a vague and bitter feeling, black and increasingly hot. With a glance to the south end, where three men they couldn't see were sleeping off hangovers, Karima gracefully stepped down into the hot spring. So we meet at last, the other woman said. Her appearance was as feral as the rumors said, and the pictures that Cloud had of her didn't quite capture the aura of potential violence this woman seemed to project. The Tsuchikage, Arsura of 5 bears, I presume? Karima said in response. And you would be Death Fog Karima, representing your husband, the famous Reikage, so-called strongest of Hidden Cloud. The Tsuchikage replied, a smirk tugging at her lips even as her voice responded evenly. Some would say strongest. Karima shot back. The lack of any qualifier was the point. Since the Leaf's Yondaime died, I might even be one of those some, eh? Arsura responded, chuckling. Strongest of any hidden village. But Arsura said, wagging a finger, maybe not strongest ninja. Karima raised an eyebrow. Are you perhaps talking about Missing Nin? Arsura smiled. Yeah. Continuing with Hidden Leaf, there's a guy named Uchiha Itachi, the S-class Missing Nin, Karima said, who appeared in the Leaf Bingo book rated as Extreme Danger, Do Not Engage about the same time the Uchiha clan disappeared, killing off that whole family, feared above all others. There were continual dark rumors that the Uchiha had practiced some sort of ritual fratricide, back when there were Uchiha. Itachi was the bogeyman of the Leaf Bingo book, rated as even more dangerous than the legendary Orochimaru. Arsura said. A full-blown murder machine. Wonder what he's up to. I don't know either. Karima said. First the Kyuubi, then the Uchiha disappearance, and finally that sound/sand invasion. Leaf is the weakest they've been in over 60 years. No better time to invade, huh? Arsura said. You been hearing that a lot? It's true. We could crush them into nothing. Then there would be a big power vacuum in the middle of the continent. Lots of war and chaos and most of all, opportunity. For you there is another condition. Karima said. The Fire Lord, it seems, is himself acting to protect those that hide in the leaves. Yumidano from his court is betrothed to Dotodano, the Stone Lord's son. That's pretty true. Arsura said, smiling. It didn't entirely reach her eyes. It would be pretty embarrassing for the leadership of our country if we started a war. Arsura flapped her hand at the wrist. But the Leaf have appointed that notorious superflake Tsunade to the tricorner hat. It would be pretty believable to the rest of the world if she started something, and then the mud would be on the Fire Lord's hem, not the Stone Lord's. Karima frowned. I was under the impression that you were more interested in peace, Arsura-dano. Arsura shrugged. The supreme dictator of the Earth country, that's someone else who's not me. Karima didn't outwardly react. I understand that the rice tariffs the Fire Nation imposed on the Earth country following the last secret war have made finance difficult. If the envoys representing the Stone Lord bargained from the position of strength, then the Earth budget would be eased. Arsura grinned. And us that hide in the dirt, we're the strength that props up stones. The faction of the late Gasher is pushing to acquire the Byakugan. Karima said. The strategy office has already accepted some mission proposals for evaluation. They were rejected in the planning phase, but it's already been tabled as an objective again. And I've still got people that want blood for Bellflower Pass. Arsura said, including your number 2, right? Karima prodded. Arsura smiled again. It was very sharp and not welcoming at all. What kinda old hens are we turning into, gossiping on like that, eh? Arsura leaned back, closing her eyes. Anyway, I'll commit to an alliance with the Cloud. A mutual defense pact. So if we go to war you have no choice but to get dragged in, huh? Karima said. And if a certain Cloud faction antagonizes the Hyuga again we might have a war on our hands. Then you have to get dragged in, even if you protest you don't want to, because of poor Yumidano. Arsura grunted sourly. For what it's worth, if I had been Reikage, I would have had Gasher executed. Going off half-cocked on his own like that, and then his party had the gall to call diplomatic immunity. Arsura shook her head. Karima sighed. It was a very tense time. The various feudal courts were almost unanimously aligned against us. If the third Hokage had called for war, well, the Mist was looking for something to pull their country back together, and they had no hatred for the Leaf, bloodlines aside. And our own satellite countries began to make condemning noises. Karima shook her head. A tense time indeed. Arsura leaned back, sighing explosively. It sounds like we're being dragged towards a war. Karima nodded. If that's the case, the Reikage would prefer to be one of those still standing when it ends. Asura chuckled. Well, that's a philosophy I can get behind, eh? Let's lean on each other a little bit, then. The two women reached out and shook hands. Alliance, Karima said. Between cloud and stone, Asura said with a grin, with a leaf wedged between them, right? She chuckled a bit. I guess you could say I represent the rock, and you guys at Cloud are a pretty hard place. Karima frowned. That was a terrible joke. Yeah? Asura said. So, the terms should be simple and straightforward, for now. Non-aggression and mutual defense, for now. Karima agreed. Doubtless the mission offices will have their own terms to bicker over. They always do. Urisa sighed. It was something of a joke that ninja treaties were 10% blood and 90% money. The meaning was, if one page of a treaty between villages concerned their military forces, like border patrols, there would be 9 more pages covering numbers and sorts of missions that the other village would be allowed to take in the foreign country. Anyway, Asura continued, among her other talents Tetsuko is a skilled calligrapher. Calligraphy, in the ninja world, was a science of inks, papers, wordings, and brush strokes designed to impede counterfeiting. Asura grinned. You'll understand if I send along a scroll myself labeled Reiko's eyes only, right? Karima grunted sourly. I suppose I can trust it not to be a blast note. Asura chuckled. Well, whatever. We'll drop by your place with the documents around 9 tomorrow morning, okay? She heaved herself out of the spring, the motion exaggerated in the unique way of the Tsuchikage. The meeting was over. Karima climbed out herself, somewhat more sedately. She wondered how Asura had managed to track them back to their inn, but gave it up. The Tsuchikage wouldn't reveal her ninja's methods so easily, no matter how congenial the woman was. So? Any luck? Kakuzu demanded impatiently. Hidan's eyes snapped open. God damn it, Kakuzu, can you shut your damn trap for just a minute or what? Shit. Hidan grumbled. I almost traced it down. Anyway, yeah. I found the Two-Tails chakra, but if some bastard hadn't interrupted me in the middle of my search I might know where the bitch was. Hidan has the best chakra senses of anyone in Akatsuki. His religious jutsu and various rituals have given him the longest and most sensitive range of sensing ability. He can even compete with Setsu at detecting demonic chakra, but only when he's meditating. Kakuzu closed his eyes and counted to 10. Very quickly. Did you at least get a direction? Hidan swore, pulling the pike out of his chest. Yeah, she's definitely somewhere at the festival, but I'm not sure where exactly. I just felt the double pulse of the two-tailed beast. It's close, that's all I can say. Asshole, Kakuzu lunged, slugging his partner so hard his jaw broke. We're moving out. Hidan's response was even more venomous than it was garbled. The springs are quiet. The surface of the water has stilled. There isn't a sound to be heard except the cry of an occasional bird. Both teams of ninjas are long since gone. With a pop, a boulder sitting in the middle of the top spring disappears in a cloud of smoke. There is a rush of water to fill the empty volume, and ripples spread out across the surface of the lake. With a gasp, Naruto pops up. He is sweating, although he is too wet to tell. He looks down, and grimaces. There is another pop of ninja smoke and it's Motoko again. Breathing heavily, she heaves herself out of the hot spring, and shakes the water off as best she can. She had used her super henge to turn into a rock. Naruto had done one of Sasuke's big shuriken, once, in the fight against Zabuza, and it had been very hard to compress his body into a shape so much smaller than him. Bigger was easy, but it got hard past a certain point to sustain a larger form. That big rock had been difficult. Motoko didn't want to think about what would have happened if the jutsu had failed in the middle of that discussion. If her control had been a little bit worse, it probably would have. Absently, she cancels the Kage bunshin in the lower spring. They had been drunk, but they were better now. They were clones of Naruto, after all, and possessed his same capacity to sublimate poisons like alcohol. By the time the ninjas had showed up, maybe they could have heard something. Yeah, they'd been able to hear some of it. Enough to cement it in Motoko's brain, anyway. She slogged out of the spring, already musing over what she'd heard. After swearing to an alliance, they'd agreed to meet up one last time tomorrow, at the inn. That would probably be pretty easy for Motoko to spy on. His name is Shursui, just Shursui, and he is watching with some amusement as a stiff-necked man in a press suit walks into the bar in a small town on the southern border of the waterfall country. Shursui is a grizzled old man who has seen many things in his long life as a ninja, mostly terrible things. The man who just walked into the bar is almost painfully stereotypical. He is well-dressed, but not too well-dressed. His tie is tight, and his shirt is buttoned all the way up to the top. The collar is folded neatly, His suit is clean and neat and conservative. He is carrying a briefcase. It is taunt leather over a metal frame with brass corners. To top it off, the man is wearing thick glasses and his hair is so neatly parted he must use a ruler. But he walks in the dirty, dingy bar, glances around absently. His eye, Shisui notes, lingers on only old him, the most dangerous man in the place, and then walks calmly and confidently up to the bar, sits down, and orders something hard from the bartender. The man slides the bartender a bill, and the bartender looks around, hesitating, before leaning in and speaking quickly to the man, their foreheads almost pressed together, before moving off. The man finishes 2 more drinks while doing, of all things, spreadsheets on the bar counter. The next time the bartender brings him a drink, the man speaks to the bartender. Then the waitress brings him another beer. Didn't order that, Shisui says sourly. The waitress jerks her head towards the man at the counter. Boss says that guy over there said to give you another of whatever you're having. Shisui responds. He doesn't agree, but he knocks back the beer he has been nursing all night anyway. He takes the new one, contemplates it, and then goes to sit down next to the man at the counter. I am hiring for a job, the man says, packing spreadsheets into his briefcase. Shisui smirks. And you're thinking of hiring me? The man turns to meet Shisui's eyes for the first time. Shisui is impressed a little. Yes, I am, the man replies. Huh, Shisui says, turning away to take a swig of his beer. And why would that be? Because you are a missing nin who is looking for work, the man says. Shisui almost gags on his beer. How do you figure that? The man turns and smiles. I could go through the whole logical process I followed to reach that conclusion, but that would be too trite. He pauses to knock back his own shot of whatever. Shisui can smell the alcohol in it from here. My name is Bookie, the man says. It's not just an alias. I have responded to that moniker for over a year. When I think, I refer to myself as Bookie inside my own head. He pauses. Just like your name is Shisui. Shisui grunts sourly. The bartender was a little too free with information, it seems. The employer to whom I owe my loyalty is currently incarcerated in a fire country jail, the man called Bookie says. He ran a Yakuza group and was jailed for running a gambling establishment without any licensing. And what, you want to bust him out or something? Shisui says. That's damn hard. Normally it would be. Bookie nodded. However, the Leaf Village is seriously low on manpower. They are accepting missions at a normal rate to give the appearance of strength in other countries, but that means their normal military duties are suffering. Things like prisons for gamblers and drunks and white-collar criminals are very lightly guarded. So you think what, you're just gonna waltz in and bust your guy out, no problems? Shisui says with a sneer. Bookie shakes his head. No. I have no ability in ninpu. He pauses and glances at Shisui. A strong ninja, however, could free my employer. If that strong ninja didn't kill any guards and we fled immediately across a border, it wouldn't be worth the Leaf's resources to get us back. That's pretty ballsy, Shisui says. But you're putting a lot of faith in this strong ninja, eh? Bookie smiles. Come now, Shisui-san. Could a Jinchuriki really reach old age without being strong? Shisui abandons all pretense and turns, glaring at the man. No need for such hostility. Bookie murmurs. And please remember we are just 2 gentlemen conducting business in this kind of bar. In a fight, with this many missing nins around, I would die. Shisui turns back to the bar, and hunches unhappily over his beer. My father was a minor official in the finance ministry of the Mist Country, Bookie said blandly. I was 14, and nearly ready for the government employment test when the Civil War began. He paused, and glanced down at his empty shot glass. My parents were killed in a jutsu exchange that took out most of our neighborhood. I understand some Mist Hunter nin were fighting a mother and daughter who happened to have a bloodline that apparently involved an extraordinary amount of collateral damage. He stopped speaking while the bartender refilled his glass. Eventually I managed to immigrate to the Wave Country, where I got a job counting taxes collected from desperately poor fishermen. He paused again to knock back the new shot of alcohol in his glass. Then I was pressed into the service of the Gata Corporation. I invested drug money in boats, so Gata could put a whole nation under him. After Gata died and his corporation imploded, mostly from board members hiring assassins on each other, I managed to flee to the Fire Country. Since I didn't have any paperwork and I was technically a criminal anyway, I ended up running the books for a gambler. Bookie turned to smile at Shisui. After a lifetime of experiences, I imagine we've reached the same conclusion, you and I. Humans are the real demons. Shisui turned to his beer, and finished it off. Finally he said, so why are you trying to bust your boss out, anyway? Bookie shrugged delicately. Because he is a decent man, Shursui chuckled then. No shit, huh? Alright, how much you payin' me then? Bookie turned, and smiled his best business smile, while the two got down to haggling price. Yujito was milling through the crowd, feeling irritable and drained. She hadn't slept well last night. Her dreams had been dominated by phantom memories from the demons sealed inside her. She didn't wake up screaming anymore, though. Then after a night of poor sleep she'd essentially been on alert for 3 hours while Karima-san and Atsuchikage plotted and planned. Now she was out by herself. She probably shouldn't be, but she didn't want to be around anyone else from her team right now. She wished Motoko was around. Yujito grimaced. Motoko was apparently a kunoichi. And not just any ninja either, someone from the Hidden Leaf. An enemy. But at least she wasn't here on a mission. If they fought, Yujito would kill her, of course, but she very much didn't want to. The sound of some drums startled her out of her reverie. For a moment she thought they were the huge drums from yesterday, but they weren't. These were lighter, and accompanied by other instruments, playing in a more complicated rhythm. Curious, Yujito drifted closer to the platform where the music was coming from. In the field adjacent to the band, people were twirling about dancing. It looked very complicated, but each person's role was simple. It was a dance traditional to the Snow Country, although Yujito couldn't remember the name. Yujito wished Motoko was here. Hey! Motoko said. Yujito startled badly as the other girl hung off her shoulder. What ya doing here? Motoko shouted brightly. Waiting for your boyfriend? And no. Yujito said, trying to imperceptibly slide the kunai back into where she had hidden them in the belt of her yukata. It wouldn't do to flash knives in front of the other girl. Good. Motoko said, pulling Yujito forward. You can dance with me then, but I don't know how. Yujito protested. Me neither. Motoko chirped. But it's okay even if we screw up, as long as we have fun, right? Pretty girls will be forgiven anything. Yujito stopped resisting, and let the other girl pull her forward. They began to imitate the other people around them, couples that were dancing to the loud instrumental music. Motoko grinned. See? You're doing good, there's nothing to be worried about. Yujito smiled back. I've always been told to do my best at everything. Motoko laughed as they spun about in a circle. That's good. The music ended. The song was over. Most stood and left, while some stayed where they were, waiting for the next song in the set. For as long as I could remember, I always had to do my best. Or else, Yujito said, trailing off. Or else she would be devoured and replaced by the two-tailed cat. Or else she would be replaced by a better host, leaving her a desiccated, chakra-less half-corpse. Motoko frowned a little. That's good, isn't it? Why shouldn't you? Sometimes. Yujito said. Don't you get tired of it? Of this life? Motoko paused, and looked Yujito in the eye. I'm not the most tactful person around, but you're not talking about dancing anymore, are you? Yujito gathered her thoughts, and wet her lips. That had been uncomfortably direct. Well, I guess you could say we work in the same industry. It was the easiest way to explain that she was a ninja, and that she knew Motoko was a ninja, too. Seeing the other girl's lack of expression, she hastened to explain. Huh! Motoko thought. She was still trying to puzzle that one out, but she discarded it to follow what Yujito was going to say next. It probably wasn't too important, anyways, and Motoko didn't think it would be a good idea to ignore what Yujito was saying. I'm not happy with my job because it's not something I picked for myself. Yujito paused. But at the same time, I have to, otherwise I would be worthless. She didn't know what she wanted to say. She didn't know what she meant. But Yujito was sure Motoko would understand. Motoko couldn't figure out what Yujito meant. At all. But Naruto had a keen ability to detect the loneliness of other people. A long time ago, Motoko said, I decided to walk the path where I would have no regrets. She paused, as images suddenly welled into her head. A waterfall and a friend. An exchange of heated words. Chidori. A tale of burning red chakra. Wings of darkness. Chidori and Rasengan. Rising yet again. A fiery haze. Two tails. Lashing, swirling, malicious chakra bound into that shape. Despair and horror. Since the other had run out of chakra, Naruto had seen himself reflected in two dark eyes before he'd smashed his friend into the ground. That guy didn't get up again. Getting up again, that was something only Naruto could do. Sometimes, no matter what, something will happen that we regret. Motoko said. Because of his injuries, Sasuke couldn't consciously remember anything from that day, although he might retain fragments from his Sharingan. Tsunade said the Uchiha boy had gotten off lucky with that small amount of brain damage. The injuries had been within the legendary Sanin's ability to heal. Naruto shook the bad memories off with the ease of practice. Embrace the future. The past is already done. So, Motoko said, the only thing you can do is what you'll regret the least. Motoko smiled, and it was somewhat bittersweet. Realizing you'll have regrets, what can you do that you'll look back on as the best choice? Yujito frowned. That's not very comforting. Motoko smiled crookedly. Well, it's that way for everybody, so at least it's an experience you can share with everyone else, right? I'm not the same as everyone else. Yujito said heavily, slowly. There is something that makes me different. Yujito swallowed. I'm not supposed to be a human. Huh? Motoko wondered. A tool like Haku? Then Motoko scoffed, rejecting the idea out of hand. That's stupid. She waved her hands around, getting worked up. You have hands and a body and stuff, right? Thoughts and human feelings, right? Motoko glared fiercely, daring Yujito to disagree. Yujito nodded, hesitating. Whatever foofy words we use, reality isn't dependent on words. Motoko leaned in and hugged Yujito. You're definitely a nice person. Even if 1,000 people said otherwise, well, that's 1,000 wrong opinions, okay? Even if 1,000 people said sashimi was better than ramen, that doesn't mean ramen isn't the best food ever. Motoko released the hug and smiled. Yujito smiled back, eyes watery. All right, Motoko said, roaring loudly enough to startle the 12 other people closest to them. Let's dance until we pass out from exhaustion. I have no idea what we were just talking about, Motoko thought, but at least Yujito seems to be in a better mood. The universe, Uchiha Sasuke decided, hated him. He handed over the natto he'd been sent to get. Thank you, Sasuke-kun, cooed the fire lady. Sasuke responded, trying to deflect attention away from himself. He looked away meaningfully in another direction, the closest he would allow himself to come to pointing and shouting, "What's that over there?" But it made his hair flip dramatically over his forehead. The effect was really cool, and the fire lady squealed. He was a ninja. Not an errand boy for a spoiled noble. That will be all for now. Thank you so much, the fire lady said. The problem was spoiled nobles were rich enough to hire ninjas as errand boys. Sakura was smirking. Didn't she have a crush on him or something? Sasuke didn't get girls. Motoko didn't care that he didn't understand. She even thought it was cute. Sasuke disappeared in a shunshin before she could come up with another errand to send him on. He landed on a rooftop beside Kakashi, who was lazing about while watching Sakura and the fire lady wander about the festival stalls, looking at the different trinkets on display. Good job, Kakashi murmured. He was clearly distracted. He was probably at a good bit. He was about halfway through the book. It was probably the scene where Goichi stumbled across the lesbians and was invited to join. Not that Sasuke would know or anything. Sasuke said. Kakashi sighed. Such a dull boy. He wouldn't appreciate fine literature like Ika at all. Anyway, why don't you go see what Shikamaru's up to, or something? Shikamaru had been dragged off by Temari. Strictly speaking, he probably shouldn't be going off with a girl on a mission, but on the other hand, she was a combat-type ninja from an allied village with known enemies in town. Kakashi couldn't in good faith allow an allied ninja to move about alone, just as he couldn't provide leaf intel to another village, allied or no. Letting Temari drag off Shikamaru was an excellent compromise. She had an ally in case of a combat situation, and he didn't have to tell her that enemies were in the area. Sasuke grunted again and vanished. Kakashi giggled again. With any luck, Sasuke would stumble across an awkward scene. Even though he was an introverted freak, Kakashi had been young once too. It wouldn't be good if Shikamaru was too friendly with a kunoichi from another village. After all, this was just another way for him to look after the people under him, that's all. Even if it was troublesome. Itachi paused. He glanced over at his partner, quirking his eyebrow meaningfully. Kisame saw the meaning. Why did we come here again? Kisame grimaced back. We couldn't renew at the other place. Then, he shrugged half-heartedly. Someone else had reservations. Itachi breathed out louder than normal, the closest he would come to a frustrated huff. But why here? Kisame just grunted. Only place with vacancies. Itachi's eyes flicked to the owner, who was currently berating them. Itachi for having such long hair, and Kisame for being blue. I can see why. Don't ignore me. The owner of the Hogyain seethed, shaking her finger vigorously. Why, if you were my children, I would box your ears for your impertinence. When your elders speak, you'd do well to listen. Understand? The old harridan demanded, scowling up at the Uchiha. Kisame was too tall. Itachi merely closed his eyes. Don't you close your eyes when I'm talking to you, young man. Itachi opened his eyes, Mangekyo Sharingan spinning. Tsukiyomi, he announced. With a gasp, the old woman collapsed to a heap on the floor. Without missing a beat, Itachi stepped over the insensate geriatric. Think she'll be okay? Kisame wondered. I don't care. Itachi honestly responded. He stepped over to the register behind the desk and looked down. The room at the front end of the hall is free. We'll take that one. He penned a name down. Kisame hefted his sword back onto his shoulder as they moved to the room. So, what did you do to her exactly? The usual. Itachi said. Ah. Kisame nodded, wincing. We have an early day tomorrow. Itachi said. Yeah, I'm about bushed myself. Kisame agreed. Let's call it a night. Neither Missing Nin questioned the logic of searching a town for a 13-year-old boy like Naruto and a lounge lizard like Jiraiya at 6 in the morning and ending their search to go to bed at 9 o'clock sharp. Make new show. You're probably wondering why you were all called here today. Yeah, Deidara said. Pain turned to glare at his subordinate. That wasn't a question. Sorry. Deidara muttered. Anyway, Pain said, what with how our motives have finally been published, and we're actually getting screen time for us as an organization, and just what with how everything after the time skip has been going, I think it's time the Akatsuki organization considered diversifying its interests to protect our assets against the canon. Kakuzu raised his hand. Can we do it before the anime airs my fight scene? Pain nodded decisively. Yes. And I definitely want to go through with it before, we find out that the real leader is Madara masquerading as Toby for some asinine reason. Wait, what? Hidan said, as he was the only one who had not figured it out on his own, since the others were competent. Anyway, Pain said, steamrolling over Hidan's question, the point is, I got us a gig. So, we need to figure out who's going to be which planeteer. Finally Kisame spoke. I don't know if this is such a good idea, boss. I mean, shut up. Pain snapped. I don't like this either. But they control the whole planet from the shadows under the direction of a god using their mystical ring powers. It was either this or those ring wraiths in the Lord of the Rings movie trilogy, and frankly, none of us know how to ride horses. There was an incredulous pause as the elite group of sociopaths took that in. Itachi spoke up. I know how to ride or zip it. Pain said. Itachi began again. But I zip. Pain shouted. Itachi began to sulk quietly. Good. Pain paused. Kakuzu, you're going to use the heart ring. He paused, waiting for someone to endorse this as a good idea. Nobody made eye contact. It's because Kakuzu has 5 hearts, see, so he should have the heart ring. I get it. Kakuzu grumbled. We get it, Pain continued. Hidan, you're his monkey? What? Hell are you talking? I don't want to hear it. Pain said. These assignments are final. There was a pause. Finally Zetsu spoke. Toby's a good boy. No. Pain said. Just no. Hidan began to sulk, although with substantially more grumbling than Itachi. Pain continued unhindered by the opinions of his subordinates. Anyway, Kisame. You get water. Since you know water jutsu and you're a fish man, Kisame, a little hurt by the typecasting, just nodded stiffly. His therapist had explained to him in his last session that he shouldn't let himself be defined by other people who were only familiar with the shallowest parts of him. He was given an exercise. Every time someone hurt his feelings by thinking he was just a bloodthirsty shark-man hybrid killing machine, he was so much more. He should think of one thing he liked to do that broke that stereotype. So Kisame thought about baking cookies. Itachi thought his snickerdoodles were especially tasty, so it looked like Kisame was pouting, even though he actually wasn't. It was his thinking face. Itachi, you're that Wheeler kid, who had fire. Itachi was still sulking, so he was giving Pain the silent treatment, but the leader knew he heard. Conan, you gotta be wind. He flinched at the venomous look his childhood friend gave him. Look, we have to have at least one girl in the Planeteers, so you have to join. Plus your origami thing is the closest to wine jutsu we have in the group. He broke eye contact with his teammate and turned to his most trusted subordinates. Zetsu. Yes? Yeah, the Earth Ring. Pain simply responded. Acceptable. That's fine. Just don't eat anyone. Pain admonished. We're nominally the good guys in this. We can't go around committing cannibalism. Ah. No fair, boss. I still don't want to hear it. Pain firmly returned, ending the argument. Deidara raised his hand. Yes, Deidara? Pain said. What about Captain Planet? I mean, he's blue with green hair, but you already made Kisame water, So, Deidara didn't know how to finish what he realized, in retrospect, was a somewhat tactless question. Because of his freakish mouth hands, he knew how much being judged hurt. He would put a note in Kisame's "I'm sorry" jar after the meeting. Well, Captain Planet is summoned by the combined power of the rings and possesses dominion over nature, so... Pain trailed off, looking over his shoulder at the gigantic, open-mouthed, nine-eyed statue that dominated the room. It was surprisingly easy to forget it was there, looming in the background. The only sound was Conan, putting her face in her hand while she groaned. Chapter 9, S-Level Combat. A bird began to sing. Itachi's eyes instantly opened, Sharingan swirling. His gaze flickered out the window. He made eye contact with the robin and cast a preliminary genjutsu on it before deciding it wasn't a threat. He released the Sharingan and cancelled the illusion, sitting up. On the other side of the room, Kisame sat up and began his morning stretches. Itachi looked outside again. It looked like it was going to be a wonderful day. Ursura cracked an eye. "Hey Tetsuko." Tetsuko grunted, and blearily sat up. "What is it, boss? Time to rise and shine," the Tsuchikage said with a grin. "It's already this late in the morning. What are you doing sleeping in this late?" Tetsuko wasn't amused. "Well, I was up most of the night carefully writing documents you capriciously decided on giving the Cloud Envoys this morning." Details, the Tsuchikage said breezily. "It's true that there are some things we had prepared, but delivering something with wet ink is also proof that we take this seriously and are willing to bargain." She vaulted up and casually kicked Chigaku, nimbly dodging the kunai made from a shard of rock the Doton user lashed out with. "The hell, boss?" Chigaku said, sitting up. "Seriously, what the hell?" The Tsuchikage shrugged and walked over to the last bedroll. "I'm already up," Okyut said, waving her hands as she sat upright. Ursura pouted. "Ah, you're no fun. Let's just go," Tetsuko said, with a put-upon air. "Okay," Tsuchikage said. "Anyway, this is just us being nice and saying goodbye. Everybody smile and look happy. This is the home stretch, so don't get careless at the end." She grinned. "Move out," she shouted, and flashed away with Shunshin. Kisame and Itachi are not the only Akatsuki that were early risers. One of Hidan's many absurd religious rules was a mandate for rising at dawn. Surprisingly, this was one of the few precepts of jashin that didn't annoy Kakuzu. A firm believer in early to bed and early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy and wise. Kakuzu's health, especially for a man over 100, and wealth were uncontestable, although his wisdom was somewhat more conditional. "Found it," Hidan crowed, pushing himself up off the ground. He snarled then, because he had forgotten he had nailed himself to the floor with his spear. He pulled the spear out, aggravating the wound, and stood up. His torso trickled blood. It was a good thing, Kakuzu thought absently, that the Akatsuki cloak was black and red. "So?" he said. "Where is it?" "Pretty close, actually," Hidan said. "Bastard was sitting right the hell down the road." "I see. Well then, let's go and see if we can get the drop on them early." Inwardly, Kakuzu seethed a little bit. He had hoped they would get to skip out on the bill, but the innkeeper had made them pay in advance for the first night. "Yeah, this festival is pissing me off," Hidan said darkly. "The hell kind of festival doesn't even have animal sacrifices?" Kakuzu closed his eyes. "Seriously, are you trying to be dense?" He turned away, and spoke up again to curtail Hidan's angry protests. "Whatever. Let's just go and get through this." Hidan grunted, annoyed that Kakuzu wasn't going to let him talk, but shouldered his scythe anyway. Although he was pissed with his partner, he didn't mind too much. Akatsuki was the destiny Jashin-sama had chosen him for, and Hidan was a willing tool for Jashin. Yujito glanced around the courtyard. Reiko and Kamami were flanking Karima, who was sitting on a blanket spread out in the courtyard, waiting to greet the stone delegation. After a little bit of debate with Kamami, Karima had decided to leave Yujito sitting in the shadow of the veranda that surrounded the courtyard and not with the rest of the group. Reiko paused in her reading, and Yujito looked up to see the group from the stone village landing in a tight formation across from the cloud group. "Yo," said the Tsuchikage, brandishing some scrolls in her right hand. "I brought some gifts for your cute husband." Men. Karima was non-committal. "Was there anything else?" Ursura of 5 Bears grinned, and glanced to her right. "Well, I was just wondering when the last time the innkeeper cleaned the futons out. There are some bugs creeping about. I guess that's our cue." A voice sneered. "Bitch, saying such a lame thing, I'll sacrifice you to Jashin as a heretic." He was a pale man with a pinched look and long hair, even more blonde than Yujito's. He had a huge scythe with 3 blades, and a black cloak with red clouds scattered across it. Don't be a dumbass, his partner scolded. That's not our goal, it isn't necessary to antagonize them. The second man was wearing some kind of head covering, but it didn't hide his bizarre eye color. He was wearing the same style of cloak and was carrying, of all things, a briefcase. TCH. Whatever, you sacrilegious asshole. The blond man sneered. What would your mother say? That Satsuki said lightly, twirling a kunai about a finger absently. Abruptly, her face dropped the smirk, and she became serious, projecting killing intent. State your business. Depending on the response, we might leave you alive. The 2 men were unimpressed, projected the same killing intent back. The masked one stepped forward. Hand over the jinchuriki of the 2 tails. He paused, weighing his words. If not, the ones left alive won't be you. Yujuto stiffened, unsure of what the response to that would be. It was at that instant the wall between the 2 opposing groups exploded into the courtyard. Motoko yawned, jaw creaking as she reached her arms up over her head. She bent her left arm behind her head, jutting her chest forward as she bent her head back. Then she twisted, popping her back. All right, she said, clapping her hands. Today's going to be great. That said, she rolled back and kipped up, ready to start her day. She slid open the door and froze. Standing in front of her was the S-class missing nin, Uchiha Itachi. He was brushing his teeth as he walked down the hallway. Itachi, she hissed. After hearing his name, Itachi paused and turned to the girl. He pulled his toothbrush out of his mouth. It was really ominous. Do I know you, miss? No, Motoko said, waving his hand. I just thought you had a scurrilous look about you, like some kind of, small carnivorous mammal, like a weasel or a ferret. Or something. Motoko flashed him a surprisingly convincing smile. Yeah, Itachi arched a brow. In response, Motoko slammed her door shut. Shit, she chanted, diving for her kunai pouch. The door slid open, and Itachi stepped in. They paused. Then Itachi recognized the Konoha standard issue equipment pouch. In turn, Motoko recognized the hand seals from practicing with Sasuke and launched herself towards the window just as the grand fireball detonated her hotel room. She spun around twice, kunai pouch clasped in her hand as she landed in front of some very surprised people. She recognized both groups of jounin from the 2 countries on her left, and 2 weird guys in the same cloaks Itachi was usually wearing on her right. Shit, she said with extra fervor. Motoko-chan. Yujuto shouted, and then Itachi appeared with a shunshin in front of the girl. There was a pause for the legendary S-class missing nin Uchiha Itachi, everyone unsure of how to respond to this new development. Finally Hidan spoke. What the goddamn hell is going on, Itachi? He paused. And what the hell are you doing in a bathrobe, Itachi? Asura turned and made glancing eye contact with Kirima. So, this guy was definitely the real deal. Itachi, what the hell is going on? Kisame trailed off as he landed on the roof surveying the scene. He glanced around, resettling the Samahatama on his shoulder before grinning. Hey, it's the zombie twins, god damn it! Hidan roared, leveling his scythe at Kisame. Knock it the hell off with that stupid nickname already. Just apprehend your target, Itachi said lazily. As it stands, I'm here for hours as well. Isn't that right, Naruto-kun? So you saw through me somehow, huh? Motoko said, straightening up. Your Sharingan really is the best. Guess the gig is up. She formed a seal, and with a poof of smoke a 13-year-old boy in boxer shorts and an undershirt was standing where Motoko was. He strapped the equipment pouch on his thigh. Itachi didn't say anything. As a point of fact, he hadn't seen through the illusion. But he'd recognized Naruto's equipment pouch. The Sharingan memorized a lot of usually worthless trivia, and guessed that such an absurd circumstance fitted Naruto. They froze for a moment, Itachi calculating the best way to avoid a multiple fighter death match with all these jounin while Naruto desperately tried to come up with a plan to escape. Yujuto stared, dumbstruck. Was Motoko just an illusion? A cover used by someone trying to get close to her group, exploiting her weaknesses? What the hell is going on? Reiko finally said. We 4 are from Akatsuki, Kisame said. We're here to capture the tailed beasts, Kisame, Itachi said sharply. Don't speak so freely, humph, Kakuzu said. I don't get what's going on myself, but as long as the 2 tails is handed over, then we'll leave peacefully. The hell, Hidan began. I'm afraid that won't be happening, Kirima said. I don't care who you are, the 2-tailed demon cat belongs to us. We won't hand over such a useful sword without a fight. Wait a minute, Naruto said, waving his hand like a child in a schoolroom. What two-tailed cat? There's another demon around here. There was a pause. Finally Kisame spoke up. Yeah, the two tails was sealed in that slant-eyed girl over there. He pointed at Yujito. She's the Jinchuriki of the Kisame, Itachi said, sounding more annoyed. He turned, glaring at his partner. Seriously, shut up. Kisame shrugged uncomfortably. Sorry, what? Naruto said, shifting to look at Yujito. Then Yujito-chan as abruptly. He remembered that the infamous Uchiha Itachi was standing across from him. Ah hell! He shouted. I'll figure it out after the fight. I don't entirely understand myself, but I do get that there's gonna be a fight. Asura grinned. Okay. It's the Cloud with their allies the Stone and some blonde spy versus the Akatsuki. That's what's going on. Her hands flashed through seals, and she roared as she slammed her hands against the ground. Then let's kill them all! She roared. The summoning smoke hadn't cleared before a huge roaring bear burst out of it, slamming into the wall between Hidan and Kakuzu. A second, slightly smaller bear leapt roaring into the air, and slammed a paw into the roof where Kisame had been standing. The pinwheel I took in everything as Itachi raked his gaze across the combat zone. That Tsuchikage was no pushover. She had already split the zombie twins using her summons, and had tied up Kisame long enough to develop a battle plan. She was cunning enough to divine that the Akatsuki traveled in pairs or groups from Kisame's talkativeness. She determined that the Akatsuki had to be split up and handled individually or they would use combo attacks to crush even multiple jounin opponents. Itachi's Sharingan sped up, ramping up with excitement. He waited patiently for what was going to happen next. Immediately after two of her bears shot out, Asura spun and began speaking. I'm assuming temporary command of the combined groups. Reiko and Chigaku, you're on the masked zombie twin. Tetsuko and Kamami are on fish face. Okyut and Yujito have blonde zombie twin. That leaves Karima and myself on Itachi. Fight well. The objective is survival. She turned to face the blonde boy that was still mostly paying attention to Itachi. Boy! She shouted. He twitched and turned his head towards her slightly, but didn't take his gaze off Itachi. She twitched for a moment, as she felt that something was off. She ducked and rolled forward, swinging around with a palm even as the boy shouted Kai. To dispel the genjutsu Itachi had cast, the leaf missing Nin leaped over her chakra claw and kicked out, nearly taking her block off before he shunshined away to prevent a counter. You've gotten better, Naruto-kun, the boy grunted, drawing some kunai. You're just getting old, you've already got wrinkles on your face. Asura couldn't help cracking a grin. The sheer balls of making fun of Itachi's face too. Well, his face was just too great. Kid, you're a leaf Nin, right? Yeah, he said, flinching slightly when Itachi shifted his weight. Well, I guess you understand that I'm gonna have to take you prisoner after this fight, she said. Don't worry, I'll go easy on you if you help us out, okay? The blonde brat snorted. Yeah, right. You'll just have to let me go after realizing how awesome I am when I save all your lives. That was a little much, she thought. Whatever. You ready, Karima? She has been for 3 seconds now. Itachi murmured. Even if you know, it won't save you, Karima said. Die in this, Onmigakure no Jutsu. With that, the hiding in clouds and fog technique billowed out. Kisame turned, glancing down as the whole courtyard was enshrouded in incredibly dense mist. It was more like fog than mist, really. Huh. He mused, letting go with his left hand to punch the bear that was graping with him, pressing down on his wrap sword. He turned back as the bear reared back, surprised, and he grinned. Samahadama. He informed the bear, before ripping the rough-skinned sword from the bear's grasping claws, severely injuring its paws. He swung around, ready to use pendulum-like power to simultaneously rip open the bear's skin and crush its ribs, when he had to compensate. Kisame ducked in, spinning the sword around his head once instead, neatly deflecting the huge iron club that would have crushed his skull. Pretty competent, he mused, leaping back to create some space for himself. The woman with the huge club just grunted, getting ready for the next blow. That one is Tetsuko the Crusher, General Staff Secretary to the Tsuchikage and Jounin. For myself, I am Asajiri Kamami, Jounin of Hidden Cloud. Began another woman, landing formally. She had a lot of hair, and some billowy clothes that could hide some serious armament. More to the point, Kisame noticed she had that large spear. She continued to speak. And you would be Hashigaki Kisame, S-Class Missing Nin nicknamed Daimyo Killer. Damn, Kisame said, standing up a little straighter. Makes me blush, knowing I'm so famous. He leered a bit, rushing forward. He ducked underneath the iron club and reached out with his left hand, grabbing the spear as it lanced out for his stomach and pushed it aside. With only his right hand holding the samahadama, he swung down his sword, smashing open the ground while Kamami ghosted out of the way. Oh, so close, he said, sighing. The two women reset. They had him pincered between them. He glanced down at the fog. The hell is that stuff, I wonder? He sniffed experimentally. Huh, that's pretty neat. I can't even smell what's going on. He turned his attention back to his opponents. Guess that's why she's called Death Fog, with that thick mist that can block sight, hearing, and smell. Probably even screws up chakra perception and touch, too. He shook his head, suitably impressed. Whatever, he said. My opponents are you too. Glad you remembered? Tetsuko said dryly. Don't be snippy. Kisame scolded. I'll take my time killing you. The one being toyed with is you. Shot back Kamami, finishing the seals while Kisame's back was turned. Kuchios no Jutsu. Kamami began. Spear him, Shurokichi. The jutsu complete, the red-crested crane, Shurokichi, was partially summoned, his head and neck appearing to the shoulders in front of Kamami. A huge ballista of a beak on thickly coiled muscle waiting to explode forward. Kisame snarled, dodging as the huge head of the bird's razor-sharp beak streaked through his position, twisting to follow as he dodged, pecking at him. He barely managed to block with Samahadama as Tetsuko crashed her club down onto him, fracturing the roof underneath his feet as he dropped into a crouch from the impact. The summoned bird, seeing an opening, launched forward like a rocket. Kisame gasped as it speared his chest. Abruptly he dissolved into water, engulfing the mouth and nostrils of the summoned bird and attempting to suffocate it. Shurokichi! Kamami cried, canceling the jutsu to free her summoned ally. Too slow! Kisame roared, spinning around to slam his sword into her from behind. His blow was again diverted by Tetsuko's club, and both used the momentum from the clash to spin about, locking weapons together. Tetsuko grunted, neck muscles bulging as she forced the Samahadama back. Too slow yourself, she ground out. Abruptly, Tetsuko dropped to her knees. Ho ho! Kisame jeered, letting go with his left hand to catch the spear that streaked over Tetsuko's shoulder, straight at his heart. It's only been this long, but your teamwork is already this good, he grinned, and Tetsuko's eyes widened as she tried to force back the Samahadama. Crazy! With just one hand, he's pressuring me this much. With the same arm strength that allowed him to use the Samahadama in one hand, Kisame snapped the chakra-enhanced shaft of Kamami's spear and lunged forward, plunging it into Tetsuko's throat. She collapsed to the ground, bleeding heavily. TCH, he said. I was too slow. Beneath him, the dying Tetsuko was replaced by a log with a poof of smoke. He turned around, grinning at Tetsuko as Kamami clapped her hands, finishing her jutsu. With a swirl of smoke, a trident appeared in Karima's hands. It was a curious thing, with a haft of dark ebony wood and a blade that was stained even darker by some mysterious method. This is the treasure of the Crane tribe, the Kuro Kukabashi, Karima said, twirling the trident about. It said the lightness of the black beak is exceeded only by the sharpness with which it spears fish for dinner. Kisame smiled, an ugly, angry smile. Cute. But you better be careful, it's not uncommon for a shark to catch a diving fish in its jaws. That we shall see, Kamami said, leaping forward, the trident spinning wildly about. Shit! Kisame thought, leaping back, dodging. He watched carefully, as the tough roof tiles were sliced up by the passing of the trident. She's channeling wine chakra through it to cut up anything that gets close. I see you've noticed this weapon's power, Kamami said, spinning the trident about in a complex pattern. Combined with the deadly sharp chakra she could emit through it, there was no opening for Kisame to exploit. Kisame simply darted forward, smashing aside the trident with Samahadama, grinning. He lunged for the finishing blow, but cursed as he spun the sword around again, deflecting another attack from the almost forgotten stone jounin. That's getting pretty annoying, he said as he leapt away. So it's true that Samahadama eats chakra, Tetsuko mused. But, she said, looking closely at the slightly cracked surface, it wasn't fast enough to completely protect itself. Kisame grinned, hefting the Samahadama. Well, since you know so much, I'll tell you more. My partner isn't just a sword, it's alive. A little cut like this will heal in no time. He smiled, toothy. The same can't be said for the blow I'll land in exchange. I see, Tetsuko said. Kamami, please stand back. You intend to take him alone? The Cloud Jounin said, feeling slighted. Tetsuko didn't break her gaze from Kisame. Yes. Mostly I don't want you to fall into the radius of my techniques. With that, she leapt forward, channeling chakra into her huge club. Where it slammed into the ground, it cracked right through the roof. Tetsuko didn't give Kisame time to react, swinging up the club and spinning it around to slam into him. He blocked with Samahadama, but his sword was completely blown away, leaving him open. Tetsuko finished with another inertial swing, crushing Kisame's ribcage. The impact was so severe that the water was instantly scattered when the clone dissipated. I get it now, Kisame said. It's like a dead blow hammer, right? Tetsuko nodded. Using earth-type chakra, change the solidity of the innermost core from iron to iron dust. Then the momentum is completely transferred through the blow. She hefted the club again. In short, a direct blow would shatter even your sword. Never mind your bones, Kisame shrugged. Well, a direct blow is a big thing to take for granted against an opponent like me, Tetsuko grunted. We'll see. With that, she leapt forward, slamming the club down into Kisame's position. He stepped back for a counterblow, but instead of moving to avoid, Tetsuko smoothly vaulted, arching up and balancing her whole body on the base of her club with her hands. With an ominous click, 3 of the bands wrapped around the shaft popped off, and coiled wires exploded outward, spinning wildly and chopping everything around her. I said I didn't want you in the radius, Tetsuko said to Kamami when the whirling stopped. Kakuzu frowned, leaping away as the bear smashed into the wall, before it turned around to roar at him. It lunged forward, running towards him on all fours before rocking onto its side to swipe at him with its right claw. His briefcase poofed into a summoning storage space so he could catch the bear's claw with his left hand. Even with his hand open and his fingers splayed, his hand could still barely match the spread of the bear's palm. However, even though he was dwarfed in size, he was still strong. His skin was already the dark coloration indicative of his body-enhancing, skin-hardening jutsu. The bear stood to nearly 3 meters of height, rearing back, and swung with its left paw, as well. His right hand went up, and caught that claw before it could hit, as well. It roared, and its jaws opened to snap his head off. Kakuzu, in response, pulled it forward with his hands, dropping down into a crouch and leaning forward before launching himself up, slamming the metal plate protecting his forehead into the great beast's throat. It reared back, coughing, and he jumped, spinning around to blast it in the chest, right below the sternum, with a straight heel kick. He bounced off, and backpedaled while the bear slumped over, winded. Kakuzu was pretty sure he'd severely bruised or even torn the diaphragm muscle in the great beast's chest. So close combat is out. He turned, and made eye contact with the cloud jounin that was standing around 10 meters away from him. Her vest marked her a jounin, but the most eye-catching features were the large coiled wire gauntlets around her forearms. They were almost certainly jutsu-related tools. Hey bear, she said, not breaking off eye contact with Kakuzu. Go back, we'll handle this guy here. Okay. The bear rasped, still winded. He dropped to all fours, and vanished into a puff of smoke, returning to his place of origin. The 2 ninjas stood still, evaluating each other for a moment, before Reiko dropped into a crouched stance, palms slamming together to flicker through some seals. Ryuha! Reiko shouted, pointing her right hand out, index finger extended, left hand pressed against the right gauntlet. A flickering charge of electricity on her gauntlet was the only warning, and a brilliant flash of lighting arced from her extended finger to Kakuzu. For the instant it existed, it was shaped like a serpentine dragon. The blasted fragments of a log fell to the ground in still burning splinters. Damn, Reiko said. I guess that would have been too easy. She spun, kicking away as Kakuzu landed, his axe kick splitting the ground where she had just been standing. She flipped, and pushed off the ground with her hands, which went through a new set of hand seals. Across from her, Kakuzu grunted as his foot sunk into the earth, which spiraled up around his leg, trapping him. From the feel of the chakra, there was another ninja underground, holding him in place with jutsu. He looked up, and the gauntlet woman was doing the same hand seals as before. If he was trapped this time, he couldn't dodge, and he couldn't drive the electric charge to ground. The Earth user would prevent that. Well, if you can't dodge or block, obviously you should counterattack. His left eye twitched as he screwed his face up, concentrating, and he pulled open the top of his cloak to expose the scowling black-nosed mask. Right on, John? He grunted, just as the woman pointed her finger and launched her Rarihaha. The false darkness and the lighting dragon blast collided, a flash that exploded sideways, igniting grass and flashbaking the ground as the 2 charged blasts negated each other. He grunted as her apparent partner twisted out of the ground. She was a dirt-covered woman in a stone village jounin vest and a dark brown jumpsuit. "He did something weird," she said. "He's sticking these strange threads into the ground. He almost speared me with them." Kakuzu scowled, retracting his threads. That was true, but it was also true that she had almost sheared his threads off with her earth jutsu in exchange. He had better avoid underground fighting for the time being. Kakuzu unbuttoned his cloak, better exposing the scowling black-nosed mask. "Raiton," John launched out again. In the instant of the blinding flash, he also formed a hand seal. Reiko simply held up her hand and grinned. The flash of lightning converged on her hand, arcing into her gauntlet. "Raiton Uriautetate," Reiko said. "Don't even bother, my capacitance shield can completely absorb the electric charge of any Raiton attack." "Bunshin Daibikuha," Kakuzu's voice said from behind them. It was the only warning they had as the shadow clone detonated. Chigaku lunged, grabbing Reiko by the shoulder as she pulled them both down, a wall of earth erupting up and around to protect them from the explosion. She had felt the vibration the instant the second set of feet had landed on the ground, and had reacted. She flashed through her own hand seals, and slammed the ground. "Doton, Jie no Naraku." Kakuzu flinched, jumping back. He recognized the technique. The Underworld's Fang was a B-class Earth-type assassination technique that speared the target from below. Nothing appeared out of the ground, but he heard the high-pitched poof as his second shadow clone was destroyed where it was hiding. He grunted, scowling as he stood up straight. "Skilled. To totally negate my lightning attack like that, you're a genius-class ninjutsu user, alright." The other two women simply ran apart, flickering through their own hand seals. "Doton Narayado," Chigaku commanded. The root dominion skill reached out through the dirt, heaving and softening the ground, throwing the enemy off balance as Kakuzu's footing was destabilized. Kakuzu stumbled, dropping to a wider stance and one hand touching the ground, back arching. He pushed off, leaping back several meters to try and find safer ground. His cloak was pulled tight as a second mask migrated to join the first on his chest. "Raiton, Haji no Kuriai." Reiko howled, her fingers hooked into claws as the grasp of the Emperor shot out of them, scouring the whole area with vivid blue-white lighting. In response, the smiling mask with the square teeth emerged. A flicker of flame was the only indication of Kakuzu's counterattack. "Katon Zukaku." The suffering source exploded forward, tearing through the grasp of the Emperor. "Shit!" Reiko swore, discharging her other gauntlet into the incoming fire blast, detonating it prematurely as she dove away. Chigaku slammed her hands into the ground. The preparatory layer of the root dominion allowed Chigaku to perform more advanced and subtle earth-type jutsu, since the whole area of ground was saturated with her chakra. "Doton, Kafuku Noyama," Chigaku said, as the jutsu began. While under the effect of the Hunger Hills, the ground bubbled in response to any surface pressure, popping open a cavity that then swallowed whatever was present, sinking it down to a murderous pressure. Kakuzu pulled his legs up as the ground fell out from under him, sweeping up into a maw-shaped crater that threatened to engulf him. Rather than try to land, he used another suffering source to launch himself into the air like a rocket. The intense heat of the Katon attack instantly cooked the cavity in the ground into something like pottery. While in the air, Kakuzu sighted down at the Doton user. She was the most trouble. The Raiton user was only capable of straight blasting attacks, which was Kakuzu's special domain. Both the scowling mask and the smiling mask aligned. A small arc of charge in the scowling mask and a flicker of flame in the smiling mask was the only indication of what was about to happen. "Katon, Raiton, Asemu." The fire and lighting elements mingled to produce the crushing blind, where the extreme heat and charge compressed the atmosphere to several times the ambient pressure, and then propagated as a deadly wall of air that would crush the enemy's whole body, even as they were fried and cooked by the component elements. Chigaku dived underground, the dirt erupting around her to protect against the powerful combined element attack. The shield jutsu crumpled in, bludgeoned by the force of the attack. Reiko was prevented from counterattacking as something flew through the air at her. It was, she noted morbidly, Kakuzu's hand. Apparently he'd somehow left his right arm behind as he jumped back and then blasted off. It was still attached to the hole in the ground by rope threads, saturated with Kakuzu's uniquely tainted chakra. Reiko dodged away, hands flickering through hand seals. The threads contracted, pulling the hand back into the hole as she bathed the area in lighting. She skipped back as she heard Kakuzu land at her flank. It wouldn't do to get pincered between him and his arm, as creepy as that sounded. Kakuzu glanced at where the Doton user was hiding underground. "I'm impressed. It's rare that I meet two people that can block even one attack, let alone a combined element blast like that." Chigaku burst out of the ground, gasping. She coughed, and blood splattered out onto the earth. Blood was leaking from her ears as well, but it's impossible to simply block that level of jutsu and not take some kind of damage. Kakuzu continued. Even if you stop the fire and lighting, you've still been hit by a powerful pressure wave. Chigaku grunted, wiping blood off her face. Well, I'm still able to fight, Reiko sighed. You've got a high-level enhancement type earth jutsu, and you can use A-class attacking fire and lightning jutsu. You can even do something that's close to a combined element attack, although it's not as good as our Reikage. She tilted her head. I've never heard of anyone that used quite that many elements at such a high level, except maybe the late professor of Konoha. Kakuzu shrugged. Well, that's not quite true. He twitched then, and pulled the cloak off his right shoulder, exposing his freakishly severed right arm and the right side of his chest. A new mask was on his right pectoral. It's not like I'm limited to only 3 elements. A faint whistling sound was emitted by the new mask, vaguely bird-like with a howling expression. Shit! Reiko swore, diving to the ground. Obligingly, the earth split open and swallowed her into a waiting hollow. Futon, Atsugai, Kakuzu said, as the blast of deadly wind from the bleeding force exploded over her position. The ground opened, spitting Reiko out. Good save, she said. Chigaku grinned weakly from her position on the ground, hands still pressed to the earth. Her eyes widened as she saw yet another mask on the back of Kakuzu's right shoulder, facing towards her. It had an upturned lower lip, an anguished expression on its face, 2 stylized tears emerging from the corners of the eyes. A thin stream of water was swirling in its mouth. Suetun, Swishabinshu, Kakuzu said, and a blast of chakra-charged water emerged from the mouthpart. The drowning creation stormed towards Chigaku's position. Her hands blurred before one touched the ground, and 3 laminated layers of earth sprung up, shielding her from the blast. Water sprayed around the shield, splattering lightly on her face. It tingled and itched uncomfortably, so heavily charged with Kakuzu's accursed chakra. The shield collapsed when the attack abated, and her eyes widened when she saw that Kakuzu was forming seals with only his left hand. Chigaku tried to jump up and run, but she felt suddenly dizzy as she stood, heaving and woozy from the damage she'd taken earlier from the crushing blind. Suetun Suru, Kakuzu said, finishing the jutsu. The water swirling around Chigaku suddenly condensed, trapping her in the prison sphere. Kakuzu grunted. So, that's one down. His right hand had emerged from the hole, and was maintaining the water prison jutsu around Chigaku, held up by his black chakra threads. He had been less than enthusiastic about leaving his earth element heart behind with his arm, but it was the only way it could counter the Doton jutsu Chigaku had used on the area. Now it would hold her out of the way. Reiko shook her head. Possessing all 5 element transformations at A-class proficiency, this freakishly cursed chakra and those masks. She grinned a little sickly. Not to mention that you're wearing the forehead protector of the Waterfall Village. Reiko shook her head, almost disbelieving. You're the Stitcher Goblin. The goddamned Stitcher Goblin of Waterfall, Kakuzu grunted sourly. Having heard those rumors. I imagine you're a veteran from the 3rd Secret War then? You're too young for the 2nd or 1st, let alone the era of secret clans. Reiko shook her head. The era of secret clans ended over 80 years ago, when they conglomerate into the hidden villages. She cocked her head to the side. So, it's true that you're immortal? Kakuzu grunted. Well, not immortal exactly. Somehow I can rejuvenate my body by continuously replacing one of my worn-out hearts, thereby extending my lifespan. He paused, thinking. You're pretty talented yourself. Even if Akatsuki might not have a place for you, you could live freely within my criminal organization. Reiko paused for a moment. Are you offering me a job? Kakuzu shrugged. You're more competent than my idiot partner. Eating a false darkness like that is no small feat. I value skill. And then when I let my guard down, my heart powers one of those masks, right? Reiko said, waving her hand. Kakuzu shook his head. Actually, individual skill has no impact on the heart. The only thing that matters for me is element disposition. Some have a stronger disposition than others, of course, but I doubt that you just happen to have an extremely strong lightning disposition. Reiko shook her head. Thanks. I think. But I'm not going to betray the Reikage. She grinned. Naive as it sounds, I believe in him. Kakuzu just nodded. Then, die. Arsura hunched down into a counterreactive stance as the fog billowed out, perplexing her senses. There was no way she'd be able to control the battlefield now, and summoning was out of the question. She glanced behind her as Kirema emerged from the fog. Good senses. Kirima complimented, drawing close. Heh. Asura waved her hand. I'm a little pissed, though. This is bad weather for summoning animals in. Kirima nodded. I apologize. However, we don't know the capabilities of his Sharingan. Rather than trying to surround him, I think it better to seal away his vision advantage. She held out her hand. There was a radio attached to a throat microphone and an earpiece. Asura took it, and Kirima lifted another out of her pocket. We'll use these to coordinate our attack, and keep that leaf Nin out of the way, right? Asura said. Kirima nodded. Indeed. It would be bad if he died, removing a counterintelligence opportunity from us. It would be worse if he escaped in the confusion. I'll keep him lost in the fog for a little bit. Clever. The Tsuchikage complimented. What's the plan? Kirima frowned, thinking. Our best bet is a pincer. I'll drive him towards you, you engage, and I'll stab from behind? Sounds good. Asura said, nodding. Best to keep it simple. Alright, let's go. Kirima said, fading into the mist. A few minutes later, the radio crackled in Asura's ear. Move 3 meters forward to your 11 o'clock. Party time. Asura whispered to herself. Itachi sighed, and closed his eyes. When he looked up, the Sharingan was spinning slowly again, reflecting the calm mental state he forced himself to enter. The Umigakyu no Jutsu, the hiding in clouds and fog technique, was a famous assassination tool used by Kirima to seal off and isolate opponents, clouding their hearing and sight, blocking their ability to smell, even deadening their sense of touch and ability to detect chakra. The high-density chakra meant it would last a long time, even without any support from the user. It was widely considered the supreme tactical intelligence denial jutsu. There was an important caveat, however. Because the area was saturated with the user's chakra, they were still capable of the sonar-like chakra detection used in the silent killing style. Fearsome indeed, but it was a double-edged sword in squad combat. Neither could the allies detect anything. Idly, Itachi spun a genjutsu around himself to blend in with the background fog. This way he would have the upper hand against the Tsuchikage. He guessed they were conferring about how to contain him right now. He felt his best bet would be to immediately strike them down in succession, if he could. His best chance would be when they tried to trap him in a pincer, if he guessed their tactics correctly. He considered creating some Kage bunshin, but decided against it for now. Soon, he would. Once combat was joined, maybe some as a delaying tactic for one of the enemy. Mizu bunshin were out of the question, probably. All the water in the area was under the control of the Cloud Group leader. Asura scowled, and her hands flickered through hand seals. Chakra wreathed her fingers, extending into wicked dagger-like claws. She had a feeling this would come to close combat. Her radio crackled. He's very close to you, Asura frowned. I don't see him, shit. He's probably using camouflage genjutsu. Kirima chewed her lips slightly on the other side. That seems likely. I'll engage him, and you'll be able to locate us that way. She sighed, clearing her mind. Of course, I might just kill him with the initial attack. She whispered to herself. She moved forward, closing on Itachi's position. He was standing straight, but wary, ready. She drew her sword, and shot forward with a horizontal stab. His hands came together for a jutsu. She couldn't see what it was from behind, but it was probably bad. She immediately struck, hoping to catch him unguarded. Preternaturally aware, Itachi twisted, dodging the blade at the last instant. He parried the katana with a kunai, the steel ringing as the hit together. His other hand whipped out, flinging 3 shuriken at Kirima. Kirima ducked as her blade met his sword, dropping down to dodge the throwing stars and spinning to cut his legs at the thigh. In response, Itachi jumped, cartwheeling over Kirima, stabbing down from above. She swung her sword up, blocking as she entered a tight crouch. She released her grip with her right hand, and reached down, grabbing another, shorter sword, and stabbed at Itachi, who hadn't quite reached the ground yet. She impaled him, and he met her eyes briefly, Sharingan still lazily spinning. Then he poofed into smoke. She swung around without looking, blocking one kunai with her left sword, leaning into that direction to avoid another from a slightly different angle. She came to a guard position. Itachi was standing a few meters away, waiting. She frowned, and reached out with her senses. Shit! She swore. That jutsu you opened with, you created Kage bunshin to stall Asura for time, didn't you? Itachi merely nodded. But you have yourself to worry about, he said, hands flickering through hand seals. That's right, she said, shooting forward. He finished, breathing in for a katan jutsu, and exhaling a fireball. Kirima grinned, filling her katana with chakra, and then slashing apart the fireball, lunging forward through the embers to impale Itachi between the ribs. He grunted, and then burst apart, spewing ravens that swirled about her. Kirima snorted in disgust. Subtle, she muttered, using Kai. She had only an instant of hair-raising warning before pain lanced through the side of her lower back. My kidney! She thought, frantic. He stabbed me in my left kidney. It was foolish of you to meet the eyes of even my Kage Bunshin. Itachi's voice whispered in her ear. Snarling, she reversed her right sword grip and drove it back, impaling him. Again, he burst into smoke. She twisted, leaning slightly. Itachi, implacable and unruffled, stood 3 meters away, just like he had at the beginning of the exchange. Except now she was bleeding from a potentially fatal wound. You were mistaken earlier, he murmured. I initially created 5 Kage Bunshin, not 1. Further, it was not Sachikuji-san that I stalled with them. Kirima paused for a moment, before growling. You mean you've just been playing with me? She snarled. Itachi just sighed, cocking his head to the side. You are simply incapable of challenging my capacity. He looked up, staring at her face. She kept his eyes on his chest, centering her vision on his diaphragm. He continued speaking. If you were counting, you'd know that I'm the 3rd Kage Bunshin you've encountered. Bunshin Daibakuha, he said from behind her, and she dove forward, twisting and hunching to put as much of her armored vest between her and the explosion as she could, gritting her teeth as the shockwave sent a spasm of pain through her stab wound. As the lunge tore it wider, she pushed herself up, and immediately flipped back as he kicked at her, darting back out of range. So that was the 4th, huh? She grated out. She was bleeding heavily. First the explosion, and then that flip had really aggravated her wound. She might actually bleed out at this rate. He nodded. 4 were assigned to you. The 5th is shadowing the real self. Then he cancelled himself to report back. Kirima swallowed her anger and shame and set to giving herself some emergency first aid to stop the bleeding. God damn it! Hidan swore, leaping away from the bear. A goddamn bear! At least it was going for Kakuzu, he thought. Hidan didn't want any part of a bear. They were crazy. He vaulted up onto the wall. He spat on the ground as he looked around for a good area for him to use his ritual in. A broad, open expanse was usually best for him. He kept his eye on the Nikomata host. She was coming towards him, and landed a few meters away. There was a big, flat roof on the next building over, a more modern 3-story hotel. He jerked his head in the direction of the building. Let's rumble up there, bitch. Yujito scowled, but jumped after him. As soon as her foot touched the ground, she skipped up and over again, to dodge the huge scythe that smashed into where she had just been. Hidan spun, kicking the cord of the scythe up and pulling it around, sending the thing careening back into his grasp. He kept spinning, and buried the innermost blade in Okyu's neck. Okyu dropped the kunai as she dropped limply to the ground, blood spurting out her mouth and neck. Then she dissipated in a poof of smoke. Oh shit. Hidan swore. I goddamn hate Kage Bunshin. It's so goddamn cheap. Okyu landed beside Yujito. What do you think? Yujito shook her head. He doesn't seem very professional at all. She frowned. But there's something odd about his chakra. Hey! Hidan shouted, pointing his scythe at them. Don't talk about me like I'm not standing right in front of you, dipshits. Yujito narrowed her eyes. Alright, asshole, why is your chakra so screwed up? Hidan sneered. Moron, it's not screwed up, it's superhuman. He spread his arms, like he was offering a benediction. My chakra, what you are sensing is that I am immortal, Yujito sniffed. Well, we'll certainly see. Hidan laughed, slightly hysterical. You'll see. And I'll offer up all your suffering and death to Jashin-sama. He flung his scythe out, even as his left hand held a rosary to his lips. He began whispering intensely under his breath. The scythe crashed into the ground, and the 2 jounin leapt apart. Okyu charged forward, hands forming the cross-hand seal of Kage Bunshin. 4 clones formed in a star around her, and the 5 ran in formation. 5 meters out, the real Okyu in the middle dropped, and kicked out behind her. The rear Bunshin caught on it, and used it as a spring to leap up over Hidan's head, as the other 3 broke apart, and took his front and flanks. Catch his scythe! Okyu shouted at Yujito. The Cloud Girl nodded, and leaped forward. Rather than trying to control the weapon itself, she landed on the cable Hidan used, and grabbed it. In a tug of war, her inhuman strength would win. Hidan scowled at the 4 Bunshin surrounding him. Lame. He sneered. If you want to slaughter someone, you should spill their blood onto your own hands. He pulled on the cable, and glowered when he couldn't get it away from Yujito. The 4 Kage Bunshin simultaneously charged forward. Hidan dropped the cable and lashed out, driving his fingers into the eyes of the 2 Bunshin on his flanks, and headbutting the one in front of him. All 3 dissipated into smoke before he could hurt them. The rosary on his left wrist jangled slightly on his outstretched hand. The last drove a kunai into his spine, cracking his backbone. He looked over his shoulder at and sneered. His back kick destroyed it. Shit. He grunted, reaching around and pulling the kunai out. It poofed into smoke in his hands, and he rolled his eyes as he dropped his hand back to grab at the cable again. Did I miss? Okyute wondered aloud. No. I'm sure I severed his spine. Hidan closed his eyes, focusing his chakra. Moron. He said. Didn't I already tell ya I'm immortal? Yujito stiffened, and dropped the cable as a pulse of chakra went along it, causing it to undulate wildly. She jumped backwards, releasing it, unsure of the effect. Damn it! Hidan shouted. It didn't work right. That shoulda shredded your hands. Okyute scowled. This time, I'll get you for sure. She formed the hand seal again, and created 4 more Kage Bunshin. She reached into her equipment pouch and handed each a kunai. She turned to face Yujito. Please cover me, but don't get too close to him. Hidan scowled. Again with the ignoring me, he shouted, charging forward, spinning the scythe around to hold it over his head. The 4 Kage Bunshin charged in 2 stacked pairs. The real one threw a smoke bomb that detonated at Hidan's feet. When he emerged from the smoke, the lead 2 Bunshin dropped forward in a charge and shoulder charged his knees, swinging a kunai around into his thighs. The top 2 jumped up and grappled his arms, driving kunai into his triceps. The 4 Bunshin jumped away as Hidan collapsed onto his knees, screaming in anger. The original Okyute formed the tiger hand seal to activate the explosive tags wrapped around the handles of the 4 kunai. They simultaneously detonated. That got him? Okyute murmured to herself. Hidan exploded out of the cloud, arms trailing almost uselessly behind him from stringy wounds in the shoulders. His legs were in better shape, somehow, and he had somehow managed a forward leap on them. Okyute, surprised, threw her hands up in front of her as a guard. He smashed into her head first, and his teeth viciously clamped on her forearm. His teeth dug through her sleeve, and he bit in far enough to draw blood. Then she disappeared with a kawarimi, and Hidan stumbled forward off balance. He turned, and grinned at her as her blood dripped down from his lips. It was a pain in the ass, but I win, he said. Blood dripped from his ruined arms onto the roof they were standing on. He scuffed at it with his feet, drawing a circle in his blood. All you did was bite me in, and you say you won? Okyute was carefully feeling her arm, assessing the damage. I mean, my rabies shots are current, and everything. You heretic. Hidan breathed out, voice laden with loathing. He inscribed a triangle into the blood circle at his feet. Witness the miracle of jashin! He screamed. Hidan's skin turned black, darkening into an unnatural shade of total black. A freakish pattern of bones was contrasting in white, a skull on his face, and long bones along his arms, even bone shapes for each of his finger joints. He raised his hand, spreading them wide. They were responding naturally, moving like they weren't even damaged at all, but they more resembled shredded meat on bone than arms. In response, Okyute's 4 Kage Bunshin darted forward, slamming a kunai in between his ribs and puncturing his lungs from 4 different angles. Hidan laughed wildly. Okyute collapsed to her knees, coughing blood. Her chest burned, for stab wounds. She could feel blood leaking out, staining her jumpsuit inside her jounin vest. Immediately, the 4 Bunshin returned to their master, 2 standing guard as the last 2 diagnosed her condition. At least 1 lung was punctured, 1 murmured, "Lift her up." The other said, "Ideally we should lay her down, but if we do it will suffocate her bronchial." Hidan turned to face Yujito, who was charging forward. "If you hit me she'll die," he said, amused. Yujito paused, faltering. The 2 guarding Kage Bunshin watched closely. "You see," Hidan explained, gesturing at the symbol of jashin beneath his feet. "With this ritual, any injury on my body also affects her body." Idly, he reached up and snapped his nose. Okyute gasped, spitting out blood as more blood began to leak out her nostrils. Her nose was bent sideways, broken. Hidan pushed his nose straight again, forcing it back into alignment. Okyute shook as her nose was abruptly forced straight again. "This is a miracle of Jashin-sama," Hidan said reverently. "I can visit my suffering onto my enemies with my body. My suffering is their suffering." He smiled, a dreamy expression on his face. "Their slaughter is my slaughter." He laughed. "Isn't it so sad we don't all have my immortal body, though?" In response, Yujito dropped, bum-rushing Hidan. She planted his shoulder in his gut and picked his knees with her hands, pulling him up onto her shoulder and charging forward. She ignored the blood that spilled all over his hands from his lacerated thighs and trickled down his chest onto her shoulder. She pushed him off his cymbal and sprinted 4 meters before stopping dead, spinning around to drop a back kick on his sternum, cracking him onto the ground. Doesn't do anything if you're not on your Jutsushiki though, Yujito said, reaching up to wipe her lip, stopping once she thought better of it. Her hands were covered in his blood. Hidan stood up shakily, swearing. You bitch! He roared, pointing. What the hell was that? Didn't I just say? Yujito said. I broke that stupid jutsu of yours. She turned to shout over her shoulder. Oh cute, don't worry. I'll finish this guy off for you, don't you understand? Hidan roared. Getting the blood of a priest on yourself, unforgivable. He roared. He pointed again, with his left hand. The rosary of jashin glinted from where it still hung from his wrist. Abruptly Yujito flinched, burning, deep pain driving down into her shoulder, squeezing her hands and arms with fire. She looked at her hands. The blood of Hidan was hissing and boiling, eating through her jumpsuit and vest and skin, lacerating her body. Enriched with his accursed chakra, his blood was attacking her. Yujito sneered through the pain. You think? She dropped to all fours, eyes growing tight. You think this tiny amount of evil can hurt someone like me? She roared, and the hot black flames of the Nikomata whipped over her skin, driving off Hidan's blood as she transformed. Bitch cat, Hidan said, and he spat blood. In response, the Nikomata roared. Asura smiled, jumping forward with a thrusting palm. That area of the mist felt slightly different to her chakra perception. Not that she could really tell much with this dampening fog. The genjutsu broke, torn off by the chakra emanating from her attack, revealing Itachi in a crouch. He shot inside her guard with a kunai in his hand, looking to stab her. The Tsuchikage kicked out, forcing him to jump sideways, and then she changed the motion of her foot midair, driving him back further. She lunged forward, swiping with her chakra claw and following with a downward palm from the other hand. The ground cracked, divots opening where the chakra-shaped claws tore at the ground. Close combat with an Uchiha is dangerous, Asura said, grinning. But letting you get to your preferred mid-range and letting you use jutsu is more dangerous. Then she jumped forward, tapping the ground with a kick to intercept Itachi when he attempted to dodge. She jabbed with a claw, and changed her mind while following through with her other hand and kicked instead, planting her foot in Itachi's stomach. She grunted as her chakra-hardened foot slammed into a log, smashing the surface. She spun, and threw a backhand, even as she dropped forward to pursue Itachi after he aborted his stab attempt to dodge her backhand. Barely made it in time with that kawarini, she jeered. Itachi shrugged, even as he dropped back from a claw thrust, and drove a sidekick between her guard. She knocked it aside by raising her knee and then reached down to dig her opposite claw into his thigh and cripple him. Instead, he spun, pulling his leg behind himself and pushing up against her, pinning her hand between them. But her other hand closed on his back, hovering inches above his spine. His bathrobe was no armor. She would have ripped his spine right out of him if he didn't have a kunai pressed lightly against her liver. I'm pretty sure you're the real one, she said, smirking. Amusingly, she noted that she was several centimeters taller than him. Itachi leaned up and kissed her. Surprised, she met his eyes for a minute. The Sharingan was a bizarre shape, like 3 sickle blades on a wheel, spinning slightly. Asura sighed as she took in her surroundings. She was tied to a huge cross, crucified. The world was inverted, a black reality outlined in red and white lines. Itachi was standing on the curiously whirled ground in front of her, dressed in his regular Akatsuki regalia instead of the bathrobe that he was actually wearing. Asura chuckled. Now she was even higher above him. I can't believe I fell for the old kiss the girl trick. Itachi shrugged. If it works, he trailed off, not bothering to finish any of the many thoughts that such a sentiment lead to. Asura grunted, using the kite technique. You needn't bother, Itachi said quietly. In this illusionary reality of Tsukuyami, everything is dictated by me. There's no way to escape. You'll forgive me if I try anyway? Asura mocked, using a chakra claw to nick her palm lightly. Nothing happened. Abruptly, Itachi was holding a sword. He didn't draw it or bring it out with a summoning jutsu, it simply appeared. He stepped forward, and slid it between 2 pockets on Asura's jounin vest, stabbing her through the stomach and internal organs until it came straight out her back and he could lodge it in the material of the cross. God damn it to hell, Asura swore. That hurts like a son of a bitch, you know that? Damn. She stilled, gasping as sweat rose on her brow. She looked down at Itachi, who was standing impassively beneath her, hands at his sides. His expression was resigned, slightly bored. He was in a professional mode. Scary stuff, Ursura thought. Pro-torturer stuff. Without any visible motion, he was holding the sword again. It was gone from her body, just vanished. Itachi was holding it again. For the next 72 hours, Itachi said, I will continuously stab you with this katana. Grunting, Kisame pushed himself off the ground. He was bleeding from several deep parallel cuts, one that was perilously close to his eye. He glowered up towards the two women who stared down at him from the roof. That last attack had been dangerous. Dozens of super high-speed wires flashing around, they had cut at least as deeply as swords. Abruptly, he grinned. Playtime's over, little girls. His hands flashed through hand seals, and he arched up and back, before abruptly rocking forward, spewing a huge volume of water out of his mouth. Sway-tun, Bakushuhal. The aquatic shockwave pulsed outward, and then condensed into a huge wall that rushed forward to completely engulf their position and wash them away. What the hell is that? Tetsuko roared, as she and Kamami were swept away on a hastily summoned diving bird. Before Kamami could even hazard an answer, the bird gave a keen scream as a water-formed shark ripped through its wing. They fell into the water, struggling to parry as 5 huge sharks formed from the very water engulfing them continuously mauled them. Tetsuko had only one desperate, absurd view of Kisame cutting smoothly through the water like a shark himself before he was on her, dragging and wrestling her under the water. Shit! She thought, struggling with Kisame, wrestling about. She could already see spots in her vision from so much exertion while holding her breath underwater. She stopped struggling, faking unconsciousness for a moment, while she let a kunai fall into her hand from her sleeve. She was about to stab Kisame in the liver when he surged forward, undulating his body like a fish to propel himself through the water, dragging her along. He exploded from the water and spun, flinging her down against the roof. She gasped, sucking air in, and sat up, wincing. At least 3 ribs were broken. She grunted, forcing herself up. She was having trouble breathing, and she was still winded from her near drowning. She wasn't capable of keeping up with him for a number of minutes still. With a sudden feeling of foreboding, she spun, but it was too late. The water swept up around her. She had only an instant to force her lungs to swallow as much air, saturate her lung tissue with chakra, hold as much air as she could before the water surrounded and trapped her. She glared at the Kisame, grinned at her, right hand outstretched to maintain the imprisoning water sphere around her. Kisame grinned as he lightly landed on the roof, several meters away. It seemed the one maintaining her prison was another water clone. You almost tricked me with that kunai. But we're not really done yet. He glanced absently at the courtyard of the inn, which was still obscured by the thick fog. Then he turned to face the street, which was ravaged by the flood-like effect of his jutsu. Isn't that right? He finished. Kamami glared up at him, before biting her thumb again and flashing through the hand seals of the summoning technique again. Please let your wings be my legs. Kamami shouted, vaulting into the air by using Kurokukabashi like a pole. Beneath her, in a cloud of smoke, a crane the size of a huge horse appeared. It was totally white, except for the circle of red sweeping up into his face from his beak, giving him the name, Akatsuki, Red Mask. Kamami landed on his back, wrapping her feet down around his shoulders as Akatsuki launched into the sky with surprising speed. Kisame chuckled as the huge crane shot into the sky, banking, before it spun around, folding its wings and diving forward, Kamami holding the Kurokukabashi forward like a lance. He jumped to the side as the pair dived down. His eyes widened as he saw the ripple of air, a cone of air around the two waver, distort. Was it a wind-type chakra effect? He leaped even further out of the way, hands flashing through seals. The Suijin Hiki no Jutsu swept up, armored to protect his body as the crane and rider swept past him. There was a loud crashing sound as they passed, and then the cylindrical water shield was shattered, and his exposed face and hands were cut more, his cloak becoming shredded as it protected his body. Scary. He muttered to himself. He grinned, and wiped some blood of his forehead with his sleeve. Using the transonic cone that compresses the air as you move at the speed of sound to heighten the power of that wind jutsu, even a glancing blow would tear most people to shreds. He paused, as the two banked around for another pass. Takes a while to reset it though. He grinned as the summoner, and her summoned monster lined up another pass. Shoot across the cloudy sky. Spear! Kamami roared, even though it would be drowned out by her jutsu as she dived at the enemy. She leveled the Kurokukabashi again, channeling her chakra and converting it to the wind type, raising the density and deadliness of the pressure cone. The two dived, and the shark man used the same jutsu as before to create a cone of water to protect him. Ready, Kamami dipped her lance to one side at the last instant, slightly changing the approach vector. The two screamed through the shield like paper, and she had one delicious look at his surprised face before the cone turned him to bloody shreds, which then dissolved into water. The real Kisame launched up from the ground, swinging his sword around with his monstrous strength to smash her as he came down. Kamami heaved the lance up, arm muscles screaming protest against the wind resistance from her high speed. She managed to cut him in half while he was still coming forward to her, but instead of spraying gore, or dissolving into water, a bisected log appeared before her. She didn't have time to react before the top half slammed into her, knocking her unconscious. Kisame grunted as the cloud woman with the spear was knocked off her crane by the top half of his kawarini. He guessed her face was pretty broken. The bottom half nailed the summoned crane like a meteor. He could hear the wing bones snap from his position on the roof. He grunted sourly, a little disappointed he had managed to win with such a simple jutsu in the end. He glanced to where his clones still had the stone jounin trapped. At least, he thought, she was still capable of glaring death at him. He estimated she had about 9 minutes of air left, based on how much air she'd managed to suck into her lungs first. He hadn't been much surprised by that. The breath-holding jutsu was common among the underground traveling stone ninja. His hand twitched. He glanced down at the ring. Sealed with mysterious jutsu, they were the key to the astral projection the Akatsuki used, and allowed for a certain, low level of telepathy between wearers. His partner was summoning him. "Looks like you're saved for today," Kisame said. Knowing Itachi, they were probably retreating now. Tetsuko glared at his retreating back, even as she gasped and heaved when the jutsu holding here dissipated. The Nikomata shot forward, and swiped at Hidan. He rocked back, sneering, and rolled around behind the demon cat. It glanced over its shoulder, and a tail flashed out, smacking him away. He skittered across the roof like a marble, cursing. He forced himself up, grunting. Even as messed up as his body was, he could move fine in ritual form as long as his bones were all attached. More so, even if he was reduced to just his bones, he could move just fine like this. Just an animal. He sneered. "You know that?" He stumbled forward, and paused, dropping his hand onto his knee, even as he pulled out his spear with his right hand. "Maybe you're some sort of super being, but you're just a goddamn animal." He smiled as the huge cat leaped forward, swinging a paw around to bat at him. He made no attempt to dodge, but he did swing his spear. He nicked its leg when it sent him flying through the air. The demon chakra and the deep slash wounds would have killed a human, if the cuts themselves didn't. The demon chakra was driven out in purple flames by the cursed power of jashin. He smiled as he licked the tip of the spear, and stumbled when his curse form wavered, realigning to its new ritual bond. He limped 2 steps forward, sneering as the Nikomata circled, exactly like a cat toying with its prey. "Loser," he sneered, ramming the spear into the side of his neck, going right through to the other side. Blood squirted out the new wound, and dropped down, splattering from his foot to over a meter out, crossing the line of the ritual circle. "A human would have stopped me from getting back here," Hidan gloated as the Nikomata collapsed, yowling and gargling, "but you're just a stupid cat." He reached up, and twisted his own neck, which broke with a sick crack. The Nikomata collapsed, and the flames pulled back. Hidan looked around himself and sighed. He hadn't even noticed when that other girl had run away. He really should hunt her down in the name of absolute slaughter, but he looked at his ruined body, and then up at the Nikomata. Jashin-sama had been very clear. He should obey the commands of the pain, because the pain would cause immense slaughter. The pain would stain the whole continent with blood, and Jashin-sama wanted the loyal Hidan to be a tool of that. So Hidan would obey the pain and bring him the Nikomata. He grinned, as his body ripped, sizzling slightly as his flesh rebirthed itself with the holy chakra of Jashin-sama. Reiko stood, waiting for Kakuzu's next attack. He didn't seem surprised she'd turned down his offer to work as a missing nin for him, but then again he didn't seem happy about it, either. Reiko hoped Chigaka would be able to free herself from the water prison he had her in soon. The crying mask popped around his shoulder, the water swirling in the mouth, even as wind began to spin in the howling mask. "Hayatan to Kudo," Kakuzu said. The water and wind condensed into a huge cylindrical shell of ice. The frozen wasteland was a hardened elongated oval that streaked through the air, gleaming cruelly. Reiko countered with a powerful lightning blast, knocking it off course. When struck with her attack jutsu, the ice shell detonated, shooting thousands of razor-sharp ice shards into the area at high speed. The shards of ice shredded the log Reiko replaced herself with. Kakuzu turned, his left hand rocketing out towards his opponent, catching Reiko by the throat where she appeared after emerging from her kawarimi. She choked as the hand began to crush her throat, but she abruptly grinned. Her right hand grabbed at the thumb, and her left dug at the fingers. Kakuzu had only the tingling warning of the defensive charge Reiko built in her skin before she dumped thousands of volts of electricity into his left hand from her gauntlets. Because she had charged her skin, it tried to ground through Kakuzu's left hand, but that tingling warning was enough. A single thread reached from the hand deep into the ground, carrying the deadly electric current safely away from Kakuzu's hand and into the dirt. Reiko snarled ferociously as the hand began to sizzle slightly. Abruptly it let go, and threads whipped around her legs, tugging her to the ground and lashing her in place. She struggled, and brought her hands up, but more threads caught her elbows and pulled them back, pinioning her into the ground. She looked up, and saw Kakuzu jumping high in the air above her, left arm trailing down to the threads binding her. His right foot was raised above his head in an axe kick. From that height, it would kill her when it connected. Damn! She swore. A spear of dirt launched out, and Kakuzu had to swerve to avoid it. He looked, and saw that Chigaka had managed to reach the bottom of the water sphere, imprisoning her with one hand. That contact with the dirt was enough for her to use jutsu. Her free hand flickered through some clumsy one-handed seals, and the water prison technique was punctured by several blades of dirt that erupted out of the ground. Then the thrusts of earth caught Chigaku as she fell, coughing. She looked up weakly, cradled by her earth jutsu. Kakuzu sighed as he landed between the two. So close. Threads reached out, pulling his arm and the heart-containing lump in it back to him, even as he released Reiko, recognizing the jutsu she was about to use to fry her way free. Even using Hayatan, Reiko said. Kakuzu shrugged. The water user this heart previously belonged to was a member of that blood limit, from Hidden Mist. So, I'm capable of using some of those jutsu. That's pretty morbid, Chigaku said. He flexed his left hand, frowning as it bled slightly from the sizzling wounds. I'm beginning to get tired of playing with you too, Reiko snorted. That's some arrogant stuff to be spouting, when you're having such a hard time. Kakuzu just sighed in a put-upon manner. So far, all I've used is simple stuff. Maybe it's A-class, but they're just dumb chakra dump jutsu. He shook his hand out slightly, satisfied with its recovery. Meaning, the genjutsu and advanced ninjutsu I've accumulated over more than a century of winning ninja battles, you will see some of those now. In that last part, his voice took on an ancient and ominous quality. His hands flickered through seals, almost faster than even Reiko's trained eyes could follow. Genjutsu Midoi. Called delusion, it was an ancient genjutsu that filled someone's senses with meaningless stimuli, just sensory noise. Reiko stepped back, as colors stopped making sense, as things blurred around her, and bizarre whistling sounds began to fill her ears. Kai! She said, breaking the illusion. She had only an instant to grasp what was before her. Kakuzu was hurtling towards her, arm cocked back. Kakuzu's fist slammed into her face, knocking her through the air. Reiko felt some teeth loosen from the impact. She turned, spinning around in midair only to fold up as Kakuzu drove his heel into her stomach, slamming her into the ground. He was about to smash her brain into paste when a huge mass of rock slammed shut on his position from all around him. He jumped, flipping over the rock that now protected Reiko after it had threatened him. He dropped to the ground, and formed a single-hand seal. 2 Kage bunshin appeared on either side of him. Each bunshin went through a separate set of seals, one finished just an instant before the other. Genjutsu Zuokai. Chigaku gasped as the world suddenly went dark. 100 skeletal figures rose from black waters, and grabbed at her with bony, clutching hands. She was trapped in the world of hatreds. She didn't try to cancel the illusion, but first did her own hand seals, ignoring what her senses were telling her. Sui Tun, Sensatsu Seisho. Thousands of water needles formed from the water scattered from the water prison and Kakuzu's earlier water blast. They flickered up, forming, and then darted in to impale Chigaku from every direction. They impacted the cocoon of dirt that rose up around her, protecting her. The last, the real one, dropped to the ground, and he shot forward over the ground, shooting his arm out, hardening it with jutsu to smash the earth cocoon, further concussing the already beaten Chigaku inside. Meanwhile, Reiko had not been idle. She pulled herself together quickly, and staggered to her knees, and began to fill her gauntlets to their maximum capacity. She forced herself to her feet, snarling around broken ribs and the pounding from her head. She drew a kunai from her hip holster. It had a bizarre shape for a kunai. It was radially symmetrical, really more of a huge needle than a throwing knife. She held it lightly with the tips of her fingers, pointed parallel to her arm. More exactly, It was precisely parallel to the centerline of her coiled gauntlet. It was the ammunition for her deadliest jutsu, with attack power totally exceeding even Kakuzu's masks. Kakuzu slammed his fist into the cocoon of dirt, and it collapsed like dough, empty inside. He glanced down, sighing. She had escaped through an underground tunnel. Reiko sighted Kakuzu's back. He turned, just in time to see her loose the jutsu. Right-un, Amadenku no Megami! Reiko shouted. The goddess of sky lightning discharged the huge well of lightning-type chakra in her gauntlet into an extremely powerful electromagnetic field. As the field expanded, creating an electric flux, it exerted an immense force on the steel kunai. This railgun-type weapon was capable of accelerating the kunai so fast that the air caught fire around it. In a brilliant roaring arc, the kunai shot off, the friction so great the air burned around it as it streaked through the sky as fast as lightning, glowing white-hot. It exploded through Kakuzu, tearing a great chunk out of his chest and blowing a huge exit wound out of his back. He tottered, and then dissipated in a burst of smoke. Reiko dropped, as a fist soared over her, going through where her head was. She gasped as a foot slammed into her kidney from the other side, picking her off the ground and throwing her through the air. She rolled over the ground, and pushed up to see Kakuzu and his Kage Bunshin standing in front of her. That was a very impressive jutsu, one of them said. However, anyone with a little skill will always exchange the real self with a Kage Bunshin using Kawarimi when there's a chance they could be attacked, like immediately after the attack on that other woman failed. The second one turned, looking towards the ground. And escaping underground like that took a lot out of her, when she's already bleeding internally from the pressure damage. Then they both stiffened, looking up past Reiko. Reiko turned her head, forcing herself up a little more. Standing behind her was Itachi, standing calmly, placidly, in his bathrobe. He radiated casual menace. "It's time to go," he said plainly. "Your partner has already achieved his objective." One of the Kakuzu poofed out of existence while the other slapped his forehead. "I'll never hear the end of it from that sanctimonious bastard." Itachi paused, then nodded, before he too poofed out in smoke. Another Kage Bunshin, Reiko realized. "You two were lucky today," Kakuzu said. He paused, and then turned to Reiko. "I should probably kill you, but it seems like a waste to murder such a genius." Then he was gone. Reiko grit her teeth, waiting for a moment to see if it was really over. "You okay?" she asked. Chigaka slowly, painfully emerged from the ground. "No. But I'm alive," she said. Reiko chuckled, even though it sent waves of pain through her chest. "Good answer." Ursula collapsed bonelessly, sliding down Itachi's body. She couldn't actually feel her fingers through a haze of sympathetic pain, but she still managed to dig them into his back, and snap his spine like a toothpick with her chakra claws. Then the real pain washed over her, a red haze that filled all her synapses with screaming noise. He began to collapse too, but then he vanished in a poof of smoke. With him abruptly gone, Ursula simply fell forward and landed in a heap with a thud, collapsing onto her side and rolling onto her back. She craned her head back, and met Itachi's eyes as he looked down at her. "Almost had you again," she teased, voice hoarse. "Sloppy, man, sloppy," Itachi nodded. "A Kage Bunshin I created before we began fighting was observing. The instant I created the Tsukuyomi, it exchanged places with me, in the slight delay between the execution and release of the technique." He paused, thinking. "That is the closest someone has come to killing me in a long time. You sure do know how to make a girl feel special," Ursula said. "You want to lean down here and whisper some sweet nothings in my ear? I still can't really feel my arms or legs, but I bet I could bite your jugular out real good." Itachi's face moved, the muscles in his upper cheeks tightening slightly, and then the corners of his mouth eased up a little. It was, Ursula thought, a pretty weak-ass smile. "Weak sauce," Ursula scoffed. "If you're gonna do it, stick me already." "Hell, man, I gave up meaningless killing," Itachi said the night I left my village behind. Then he turned, and walked away, disappearing into the mist. "Damn it, damn it, damn it," Naruto chanted under his breath, kunai in his hands, looking back and forth. It all looked the same, stupid dense fog in every direction, and it made his skin feel slightly numb. He created 3 Kage Bunshin. 2 jumped into the air, and a moment later the third jumped. When the third reached the first 2, they each grabbed it by an arm and threw it higher. When they landed, they formed a triangle with the original, each scanning an arc, trying to find someone. They all paused for an instant when the Kage Bunshin had cancelled itself mid-air to return some intelligence. The club lady from Stone and the chick in the big clothes from Cloud were facing off with Itachi's freaky partner. He couldn't see what anyone else was up to, but the whole local area was totally swamped in this weird fog. He was beginning to contemplate just dropping a big-ass taiju Kage bunshin on the area when a huge explosion went off behind him. Startled, he turned to look in that direction. He made eye contact with one of his clones, which shrugged. He created another clone, and it nodded, darting forward to scout the situation as he followed with his other two. Normally he would just charge in, but something about Itachi seriously gave Naruto the willies. He didn't think he'd ever forget that time when he was traveling with Jiraiya and he opened the door, and there was Itachi and his stomach just about dropped into his balls, and all he could think was, that's not Sasuke, because Sasuke doesn't scare the crap out of me. So he was being a little bit more cautious than normal. Naruto didn't have a problem being afraid, but he wasn't going to be ruled by fear either. The scouting clone cancelled. He swore, and darted forward, tucking his kunai back into his equipment pouch and pulling out a roll of bandaging. "Oh shit, are you okay?" he shouted. Kirima looked up, startled. Dumbfounded, she watched this enemy spy rush forward and start frantically worrying over her stab wound. "Oh man." He bit his lip. Finally she spoke. "Just calm down." She sat back. "If you want to help, cut away my vest around the injury, and pull out any fabric that might have gotten caught in the wound." "Okay," Naruto said, getting to work. For a moment, he industriously hacked at the armored vest, and Kirima gritted her teeth every time he bumped her in his enthusiasm to help. Then he tugged her shirt, pulling it away from the wound and ripping it open. "For now, just pack a bandage over the wound, and hold it tight," she said. Direct pressure was one of the best ways to stop bleeding. But unless something could be done about the internal bleeding, she would die soon. Kirima snarled, going carefully through the hand seals for a general tissue closing healing jutsu. She was barely at the level of a battlefield lifesaver. Fortunately, stopping bleeding, slowing poison, and preventing shock were the three most important skills for that group. All a battlefield lifesaver had to do was keep someone alive long enough for them to reach a medic kneeing. Then, she used it to seal up the stab as best she could, closing the organ tissue and the membrane sheath around the kidney, and then the skin, as best she could. She sighed, wincing as that much motion sent a jolt of pain in her side. The healing was haphazard at best. Any vigorous motion would rip open the tentative heal like tissue paper. She was out of the fight. "You okay?" the blonde brat asked, worrying his bottom lip with his teeth. "Just fine." Kirima sighed. "Just fine." She formed the tiger seal, and cancelled her jutsu, clearing the area of the mist and fog. The two looked across the courtyard, to where Asura was laying spread-eagled on the ground. "Hey!" the Tsukuge croaked. "That pretty boy screwed me up good." She struggled, and managed to flop up to her feet, arms dangling, quivering. She grimaced and leaned on her hands, forcing herself up to her feet. She stumbled twice, nearly falling on her face, before she managed to get next to where Kirima was crouched, with Naruto standing over her. Asura grunted, going through hand seals at roughly 20% speed. Finally, with an uneasy tumble, she managed to hit the ground with her hand. 3 bears appeared, different than the 2 before. Asura sighed in disappointment. She hadn't even gotten the chance to use her precious bears. Total miscalculation on her part. Kirima's area jutsu was just too at odds with the way she fought. Itachi had barely even needed to try to capitalize on that. "Hey boss. You okay?" one of the bears said, worried. No injuries exactly, but my pain nerves got messed up with genjutsu," Asura said. "Anyway, you 3 split up and track down the other 3 members of the squad. They'll be working with another lady from Stone against the guy in a black cloak." "Got it." Another bear ground out, and the 3 immediately bounded off in different directions. Asura shook her head, and regretted it because she was beginning to feel woozy. She sat down. "Damn, did he get me?" Kirima stiffened, looking up. "You," she snarled. "Please come with me, Naruto-kun," Itachi said quietly. Naruto looked up, to where Itachi was standing passively a few meters away, hands at his sides. He had appeared, stealthing in with Shunshin, and they hadn't even noticed. "Screw you," Naruto said. "And then for good measure, added and the horse you rode in on." Itachi closed his eyes, and when they opened again the Sharingan was spinning. He looked up, and Naruto unflinchingly met his gaze. One of the bears barreled up with Tetsuko and Kamami, dropping them so it could snarl at the man in the bathrobe. It was ignored, and Asura waved it down. The 2 stared for a minute, not blinking. Naruto was barely breathing, not breaking his gaze from the almost hypnotic spiral of the Sharingan, refusing to allow himself to be drawn in. Itachi calmly met Naruto's gaze. Naruto, Itachi noted, was staring back, fighting the mild genjutsu off with raw stubbornness. And then the color of the younger boy's iris began to change from its blue, flecks of red, and the shape of the pupil was less round, beginning to hint at slits. Itachi began to feel the supernatural pressure of Naruto's killing intent. Itachi closed his eyes. I see. He glanced up, and his Sharingan was much slower, rotating about lazily. His eyes flickered about him. The last 2 bears had returned, with passengers. All 5 of the women were injured, and the bears were nothing. Good, the Two-Tails Jinchuriki was not among them. He could capture Naruto and escape, but that would be a lot of work. He turned and walked away. We will meet again. Naruto-kun. Naruto stared after the man, before shaking himself and turning back to the others. What the hell was that about? Ursura finally asked. Naruto shrugged. Hell if I know. He glanced across the group. Hey, where's Yujito? Okute coughed, flecks of blood landing on her hand. I'm sorry, leader, Ursura sighed. No, you did your best. She turned to Naruto. It looks like those bastards won, so we're going to be talking to you now. Naruto turned to Okute. What do you mean you're sorry? Where the hell is Yujito? Kurama frowned at him. Not that it's your business, little boy, but they captured the Two-Tails. Naruto turned to stare down the Cloud leader. You mean those Akatsuki bastards captured her? You let them take her, Kurama sneered. There was no let. They beat us, and we have to cut our losses. That's bullshit. Naruto roared. You don't just let them take your people. Hey, kid. It's not as if we want them to control our Jinchuriki. Reiko said. Don't call her that. Naruto shouted, swinging around to jab a finger at her. Don't you dare call her that. Yujito is a person. A ninja, one of your ninja. I won't let you act like she's something less than that. Naruto stood up, running his fingers through his hair. Arg. I gotta go save her. He turned, adjusting the kunai holster on his hip. Child. Ursura said. You don't seem to understand that you're our prisoner right now. Just try and stop me, you old hag. Naruto said, flinging a smoke bomb to the ground. When the smoke dissipated, he was already charging after the group. Who's a hag, you shrimp? Ursura shouted at his back. She shook her head. Geez, why the hell does he care so much? You carry her. She's your target, moron. You carry her, asshole. I got torn the hell up fighting her. You carry her. That's because you're incompetent. You carry her. The 4 Akatsuki were standing in a circle, or a square. Itachi thought both were equally applicable shapes, around the body of Yujito. She had been shielded from the worst of Hidan's jutsu by the Nikomata and its nature, and was breathing shallowly. Stingy bastard. You're the one with super strength, why don't you use it for once and carry her? Hidan and Kakuzu were discussing which member would be the one to carry the victim to their lair so they could begin the extraction ritual. Kakuzu sighed like he was dealing with a particularly obstinate and dim-witted child. In his mind, he was. Hidan. She's your target, you carry her. Kisame turned his head slightly and made eye contact with Itachi. The shorter man nodded his agreement. The two disappeared with Shunshin. That gave Kakuzu an idea. He simply disappeared into a Shunshin too. He also liked to simply get up and leave at restaurants, sticking Hidan with the bill. Hidan turned purple and his head began to shake. Asshole! He screamed at the absolute top of his lungs. Hidan grumbled some more as he jumped along, hopping from roof to roof as he got out of town. The whole region was in chaos, because of all the fighting that had happened, but especially because those fights had involved high-power elemental techniques. So he was hightailing it out of the area before some more ninjas showed up and hassled him for carrying a cloud jounin over his left shoulder like a bag of rice. She was dripping blood down his already bloodstained back, and it was really annoying because it was getting in his shorts and making his chafe something awful. Goddamn selfish asshole. Hidan muttered under his breath. I swear to Jashin-sama I'm going to sacrifice his penny-pinching ass someday. He growled, shifting the burden on his shoulder slightly at the apex of his leap. He heard something behind him. Hidan swung around in midair just as he got tackled by 3 identical blonde kids in their underwear. It was that ninja brat that had been staring down Itachi in the courtyard earlier. Give Yujito back. The brat growled. Or at least, the one latched on his right arm growled. The 2 on this leg seemed to be trying to squeeze him to death, or something. Hidan honestly thought that was pretty gay. Loser. Hidan sneered. He hefted the girl with his left hand, and flung her outwards. The 3 ninja immediately kicked off of him, much to his annoyance. Naruto frowned. He wasn't going to make it to Yujito before she smashed into the top of what looked to be a drugstore. He reached out without looking and took the hands of his Kage Bunshin, who acted as a secondary platform for him to launch off of and catch Yujito. He grunted as he landed, desperately trying to protect her head and spine. He landed hard in a deep stance. It was pretty awkward, since Yujito was taller than his real body. He checked her pulse. It was shallow but steady, and 2 holes on either side of her neck were oozing blood. He wrapped a bandage around her neck, but not very tightly. He had vivid memories of a particularly tight bandage job during academy first aid that had cut off the circulation to his left hand. When he was finished, he looked up. Hidan was standing on the roof of a building on the opposite side of the road, cursing. His Kage Bunshin were standing a few meters in from where he was, between him and the enemy Nin. "Asshole!" Hidan shouted. He had pulled the scythe from where it was tucked into his belt behind him, and was using it to point at Naruto. "What the hell's the big idea, jumping on me like that? Loser, I'm going to kick your ass." Naruto swore, and he ran forward. He jumped in the air, clearing the street, and created a mass of bunshin as he descended on Hidan. "Bring it, little bitch!" Hidan shouted. He threw his scythe out, mowing through several Kage Bunshin. The rest landed and swarmed towards him. Naruto himself landed and held out his hand, charging a Rasengan with the help of a clone. He could do them one-handed since improving his chakra control with Kurinai, but it went faster with 2 sets of hands. Done. His clone ran forward, taking the Rasengan in his right hand with it as he stayed behind, watching. Waiting, Hidan swore, swinging his scythe and shearing through a clone. One was launched up by its compatriots, and was coming down towards his head with a kunai. Glancing up, he reached into his cloak with his left hand even as his right swung his scythe around, driving clones back. He grinned as he thrust up with his pike, impaling the clone as it came down. It dissipated in a burst of smoke. An opening! One of the clones roared, lunging in and graping his scythe. Startled, he tried to impale that one with his pike, too, but his raised arm was grabbed from behind by another clone, that was jabbing him in the side of the head with its sandal as it stood on his shoulder. Some more were wrapped around his legs, holding him locked in place. "Assholes! Get the hell off!" he roared. "Rasengan!" Hidan looked up, as a particularly pissed-looking Naruto lunged forward, holding a whirling blue sphere of chakra in front of him. "Shit!" Hidan said, as the sphere struck him right in the middle of his body. It hit. He roared in pain as it began to tear away at his body, one layer at a time, as he was unstably held in place by the clones. He struggled, and finally managed to free his pike enough to swing it down and prick the Naruto holding the Rasengan. Because of his struggling, the clones holding him lost their grip, and the whole group was blasted backwards as the Rasengan exploded, launching Hidan to go skittering across the rooftop, where he crashed into and partway through an Ika violence billboard. Hidan struggled, kicking his legs before he finally managed to flop forward, pulling himself out of the billboard. He screamed. "It hurts." He formed himself upright. "This suffering, Jashin-sama, look at this suffering." He pushed his arms apart, holding them wide, each gripping a weapon. There was a circular pit in his stomach, organs bleeding and floating ribs abraded to stubs. It looked like someone had just scooped out a few layers of his torso. "All this suffering," he screamed. "It is for you, Jashin-sama," he sneered as he looked at the Narutos, before shuffling forward. He stopped, and smiled, wildly, reverently. "Witness a miracle," he commanded, and he drew a circle on the ground in his own blood, and inscribed a triangle. Then he licked blood off the tip of the pike, and his body rippled, transforming as he entered the curse form. "Share my suffering," he crowed, slamming the pike into his gaping wound, pushing it through until it came out his back. There was a pause, and then all the Narutos popped into wisps of smoke. Except one, the one that had used the Rasengan on Hidan. That one collapsed to its knees, holding its gut. "How?" it gasped, coughing up blood. "I already told you, dumbass." "A miracle!" Hidan shouted. "A miracle of Jashin-sama." He gestured at his body. "When I'm in this form, with your blood in me, you suffer what I suffer. My pain is your pain." Hidan grinned, and jerked on the pike still lodged in his chest. Naruto twitched, falling forward and catching himself on his hand. "Loser!" Hidan jeered. "You can't lose to the holy power of Jashin-sama." "I'll never give up," Naruto said, forcing himself to stand. "Not even if you cut off my arms and legs, I'll defeat you." He stumbled forward, raising his right arm, his left hand pressed against his stomach wound. "As long as I still have breath in my body, I'll fight," he said. Chakra flickered, spinning in his palm. As long as I can stand, I'll move forward. The Rasengan bloomed into form, spinning in his right hand. That's my Nindo! Naruto roared, rushing forward. Just die like a worm! Hidan shouted back, burying his scythe in his leg, piercing his hip, his thigh, and his calf. Just suffer and bleed out like a loser. Naruto collapsed, Rasengan dissipating as he fell forward. He reached up, and pulled himself forward, 1 meter, 2 meters, trailing blood until he reached Hidan's foot. Just one more thing. He croaked. Yeah? Hidan sneered. Abruptly, Naruto grinned, his broad, close-eyed fox smile. Fooled you! He shouted. His body erupted into roots and stems, growing forward and entangling Hidan's legs, growing up and entwining his body until Hidan was totally bound by a tree. Megan, Jibaku Satsu. Naruto's voice announced from somewhere. Since when? Hidan shouted. This is bullshit, since the beginning. Naruto said smugly, as he emerged from the tree over Hidan's head. I dropped a what you want is what you get on you when the clones were attacking, right before you got nailed by my Rasengan. Naruto smirked. That pause after you stabbed yourself almost gave it away, but you were too stupid to catch it. Cheater! Hidan shouted. You're just being a sore loser. Naruto said. He held his right hand out, and a clone of him emerged from the side of the tree, reaching out to cup over his hand. A Rasengan bloomed into being. This time I'm going to take off your head, Naruto said. The completed Rasengan came down into Hidan's neck. Naruto lifted up Yujito carefully, tucking her head against his shoulder. She was taller than him, so he could barely manage to lift her bridal style like this. He had an arm wrapped around her back and another in the crook of her knees, but her feet were almost touching the ground, and her arm, the one that wasn't wedged painfully next to his ribs, looked about ready to spill out and drag on the ground or something. It was tenuous, but he had her. He was relieved that her pulse was stronger. It looked like she was just sleeping instead of passed out, now. Hey Yujito-chan, he murmured. Let's go back, okay? You're safe now.